economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on February 16, 2021, the Special Committee is meeting to discuss the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Given the timelines adopted in the House motion, the focus today will be on line 5. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would encourage all participants to mute their microphones when they are not speaking and address all comments to the chair. Interpretation is available through the globe icon on the bottom of your screen. Please note that screen captures or folders are not permitted. I would now like to welcome our witnesses from Natural Resources Canada. The Honourable Seamus O'Regan, Minister of Natural Resources, Jean-François Tremblay, Deputy Minister, Glenn Hargrove, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Petroleum Policy and Investment Office, Molly Johnson, Assistant Deputy Minister, Low Carbon Energy Sector, Jeff Levante, Assistant Deputy Minister, Lands and Mineral Sector, and Beth McNeil, Assistant Deputy Minister, Canadian Forest Service. Minister, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the committee today, and we're looking forward to your remarks. I know you're here for only 1 hour, and we will continue with your officials after you leave after 1 hour. So, Minister, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Pleasure to be joined.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This committee from the island of Newfoundland, which is the ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk peoples, and one of Canada's oil-producing provinces.
The Canada-U.S. relationship is like no other. The strength of it has withstood challenges and turbulence, particularly over the past 4 years.
Though the U.S. needs Canada, President Biden has emphasized rebuilding and strengthening our bilateral relationship, focusing on our common mission of net zero carbon emissions by 2050, building a low emissions energy future that leaves no energy worker and no energy producing region behind. It's why the first meeting with a foreign leader was with our Prime Minister and why we had a high-level summit. I attended that meeting. My colleagues and our counterparts agreed to a roadmap for renewal designed to strengthen this relationship, to rebuild our economies while leaving no one behind, and to lead the world in addressing the climate crisis. Our energy and natural resource sectors are central to that roadmap. There are no two other countries with such highly integrated energy sectors as ours. 70 pipelines, nearly 36 transmission lines cross the border, over $100 billion in energy trade every year, over 2 million barrels of oil per day. They are our single largest customer. Now, let me be very clear. We're very disappointed with the President's decision to revoke Keystone XL's permit. We are very unhappy with the decision. We've told them that directly and clearly. The U.S. will still need Canadian heavy crude, and that does not change with President Biden's decision. 4 years ago in Houston, the Prime Minister said, nothing is more essential to the U.S. economy than access to a secure, reliable source of energy. And Canada is that source. It was true then, it remains true today. Which brings me to Enbridge's Line 5. It is a critical energy and economic link. It is vital to Canada's energy security and to America's. Thousands of jobs on both sides of the border depend on it. Thousands of homes on both sides of the border depend on it for heating. We take threats to our energy security very seriously. We raised Line 5 directly with the President and members of his cabinet during our meetings last week. I can assure members of this committee that we are looking at all our options. A shutdown of Line 5 would have profound consequences in Canada and in the United States. Yesterday, I met with my counterpart, Secretary Granholm, who I might add has a link to Newfoundland. In fact, her mother grew up just down the street. I raised Line 5 with her. I raised it as a matter of energy security, and as a former governor of Michigan, she understands how critical Line 5 is to that state and to the United States.
I understand Ambassador Hillman will be speaking to this committee later today. Let me take this opportunity to thank her, Detroit Consul General Joe Comartin, the team at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, and all our diplomats who have been engaging on this issue in Washington, Detroit, and Lansing, and who defend Canada's interests every day.
A relationship, including softwood lumber, duties imposed are unwarranted, they are unfair, they hurt our workers, they hurt our industry on both sides of the border. We raised that with the President last week. But I believe the windshield is larger than the rear view mirror, because there has never been more alignment in this relationship now than there ever has been before, not only with the goals of the government of Canada, but with the goals of the governments of Alberta and Saskatchewan too. Il existe des opportunités de renforcer.
There are opportunities to make this relationship even stronger. And it's a relationship that is bigger than one project or one piece of energy infrastructure.
Today, with Secretary Granholm, we spoke at length about some of the opportunities that we have to deepen our collaboration and advance transformational technologies like critical minerals, like carbon capture. The U.S. wants to work with us on critical minerals because we have 13 of the 35 minerals that they deem essential, and we want to ensure resilient supply chains that prevent Chinese dominance. They want to work closely with us on CCUS, speaking with a unified voice, seeing it as an opportunity to have oil and gas workers lead decarbonization efforts. The roadmap for a renewed U.S.-Canada partnership presents us with a plan to protect our highly integrated energy infrastructure like Line 5, to maintain the security and resiliency of supply chains like Canadian crude heading southbound. A plan
to renew and strengthen existing bilateral agreements on critical minerals, advancing nature-based climate solutions, harmonizing standards and regulations to increase competitiveness and provide an even playing field for our companies.
It's about workers and ensuring that no worker is left behind, ensuring that no energy-producing region or province like mine is left behind. We will need the ingenuity, determination, and hard work of our energy workers in our energy-producing provinces to build our low-emissions energy future. Mr. Chair, as I said at the outset, this is the single most important bilateral relationship for Canada. We've got to get this relationship right, or we got it right with an unpredictable president over the past 4 years. We will get it right and make it even stronger with a predictable one for the next 4, to the benefit of workers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland and Labrador, and right across Canada. Je suis accompagné.
I'm joined here today by my officials, Jean-François Tremblay, Deputy Minister, Molly Johnson, Assistant Deputy Minister, Low Carbon Energy Sector, Glenn Hargrove, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Petroleum Policy and Investment Office, Jeff Labonte, Assistant Deputy Minister, Lands and Minerals Sector, and Beth McNeil, Assistant Deputy Minister, Canadian Forest Service. We welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your opening comments. We will now go straight to questions. So the first person will be Mr. Strahl for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Minister, for agreeing to participate here today. I wanted to start on we talk about how the relationship, we're getting it right. The irritants have continued here, or I'd say they're more than irritants when they affect tens of thousands of jobs. We have Keystone XL, Line 5, softwood lumber, Buy American, vaccine distribution, to name a few. So there is obviously a number of challenges that remain regardless of the change of administration in Washington. I wanted to talk first about Keystone, and I have a statement here from the Canada's building trades unions, who said they're dismayed by the decision made by the Biden administration to rescind the permit for Keystone XL, a project creating more than 15,000 high-paying union jobs across Canada and the United States. We've heard from organized labor unions on both sides of the border who are extremely disappointed in this decision. And I think they were extremely disappointed, as we were, to see the Prime Minister this weekend, this Sunday, on Meet the Press, when he was asked by the host, does this mean you're done asking for? Are you going to stop advocating for it here? Do you feel as if the Keystone Pipeline is now dead? And the Prime Minister replied, I think it's fairly clear that the U.S. administration has made its decision on that. And we're much more interested in ensuring that we're moving forward in ways that are good for both of our countries. So I think made it fairly clear that he's done fighting for Keystone. Given that that decision was made based on the U.S.'s position on Keystone XL. The Prime Minister essentially said, well, that fight is over. There's a decision that's been made now by the governor of Michigan, who is extremely close to President Biden, was considered to be his running mate, was a key cog in the wheel in the Electoral College to ensure that President Biden is the president, very close to him. Why would workers who, the nearly 30,000 workers in Sarnia, in Southern Ontario and Quebec who are affected by this, why would they have any confidence that your government would fight for Line 5 jobs when Keystone XL jobs were written off as being a decision that the U.S. administration had made and were no longer worth fighting for?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Strahl. Keystone XL, from the moment that the president was elected, our governments, the governments of Alberta and Canada, started working hand in glove together. Myself, Alberta's envoy in Washington, James Rashad, and Minister Sonia Savage, the Minister of Energy for the government of Alberta, started meeting at least once a week, sometimes more than that, in order to make sure that we had our ground game right. We knew that the president had made a significant campaign promise, and I think most members of this committee can understand that, you know, when you make a major campaign promise, it's you know, it has weight, and certainly it seemed to for the president. But we fought the battle because we believed in Keystone. We believed, as the Prime Minister had said to the Premier of Alberta, Keystone XL project of 2015 and the Keystone XL project of 2020, 2021, very different. I was very proud to advocate for Keystone XL. TC Energy had done everything right in my mind. You had an operational net zero pipeline that was using renewables at their pumping stations, wind and solar, working with unions on both sides of the border, working with Native Americans and working with First Nations on our side of the border. They had ticked off all the boxes. And when we found out on the morning of the inauguration that the president would be rescinding the license, the permit on the day of his inauguration, I found out very early here in Newfoundland, and had to inform my colleagues, the ministers of energy of Alberta and Saskatchewan, of the fact. Those aren't easy conversations because we'd put a lot of work into it. I also raised that exact point, and almost exactly the same way I worded it to this committee, to Secretary Granholm yesterday. When she and I met, I was her first international call, in keeping with what the President's Cabinet has been doing in reaching out to their Canadian counterparts. And I also made it clear that Line 5 was seen in that same light. As I said in my opening remarks, there is a tremendous amount that is aligned, not only between the governments of the government of Canada and the Biden administration, but also, I believe, and I've said this to Ministers Eyre and Savage, also with their provincial governments as well. And we need to work together.
Right. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I get it. I do have a limited time here, so I appreciate that, Minister.
50 seconds left.
Right. So to get back to it, sounds an awful lot like the plan to advocate for Line 5 is a carbon copy of the plan to advocate for Keystone XL. We know that project, according to the Prime Minister, he's done advocating for that with President Biden. So if you're doing the same thing to advocate for the jobs impacted by Line 5, why are you expecting a different result than you got with Keystone XL?
These are very different, and that is not to diminish, Mr. Strahl, from the 1,000 people that received pink slips on the day that of the president's inauguration, on the day he rescinded that license. But we are fighting for Line 5 on every front, and we are confident in that fight. It is an operational pipeline that not only employs people in Ontario and in Alberta and in Quebec, but provides energy security to those provinces and to U.S. states as well. We are fighting that on a diplomatic front, and we are preparing to invoke whatever measures we need to in order to make sure that Line 5 remains operational. The operation of Line 5 is non-negotiable.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. We'll go now to Mr. Housefather for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And Minister O'Regan, it's great to see you here before the committee, and thank you for coming. And congratulations on improving your French. A couple of just opening comments following Mr. Strahl. Did President Biden commit during the campaign that he would end Keystone XL?
He did. in May.
Did President Biden commit during the campaign that he would end Line 5?
No, not to my knowledge, no.
So I see a big difference there already. I have some questions on Line 5, but before that, I'd just like to ask you, you were the first foreign a cabinet minister to meet with the newly confirmed Secretary Granholm. And we have a lot that we have in common with the new Biden administration on climate change. Could you talk to me a little bit about whether or not you discussed climate change with former Governor Granholm, and whether or not you see some ways that we can work together with the United States to achieve our Paris objectives?
Indeed. We had some small talk off the beginning because her mother is from St. John's, born on Newtown Road, which is down the road, a parishioner at a church just on the end of my street. So those things are good things. I think I put it to her that if you're half Newfoundlander, that means you're a very practical person. So we had a good first meeting, I would say. I wish it had happened earlier because we're all eager to get to work. Expressed our serious concern about threats to our energy security. But this relationship is much bigger than just those two issues. And the 70 pipelines that crisscross across the border, the 36 transmission lines that do. Secretary Granholm brings a lot of enthusiasm to the file. I believe that we will work very well together to the benefit of workers and to the benefit of our natural resource sectors. There is significant alignment, as I said, not only with the goals of the government of Canada, but also with the goals of the governments of Alberta and Saskatchewan as well, like on critical minerals, like on CCUS. I had a conversation just yesterday morning with Minister Savage and Minister Nally of the government of Alberta, of course, discussing CCUS and discussing, me raising that, of course, with Secretary Granholm and how important that is to North America. So, as I said to Secretary Granholm, I more or less paraphrase things that I've noticed she's been saying long before she was a nominee. It's a threefold mission: net zero emissions by 2050, lowering emissions wherever, whenever we can, an economy that continues to grow and prosper, which is pivotal, and no one gets left behind. No energy producing region like mine, no energy workers left behind. That's what we're working on for the benefit of workers on both sides of the border.
Excellent. So now let me ask you a couple questions about Line 5, if I may. In coming from the position of being a lawyer, I have to ask a little bit about our legal position, because I think our legal position helps understand our diplomatic position and how strong we can be in negotiations. Mm-hmm. Does the government of Canada believe that either through bilateral agreements with the United States or international treaties that the attempt by Michigan to remove the easement on Line 5 is a violation of either international treaties or domestic agreements with the United States that we have signed?
I'm going to be very careful about what I say here. And the reason I do, or I need to be, is because I'm not going to give away our legal strategy here. Suffice it to say, with all due, and that's with great respect. Suffice it to say, one of the most important things that we learned from NAFTA 2.0, CUSMA, is you got to be careful about negotiating in public. I think that what you heard from the Assistant Deputy Minister from Global Affairs is absolutely true. We are looking at every option. We are working, whole of government approach, as we hear all too frequently, but I can tell you in this instance that is not an exaggeration. Working closely with Global Affairs, working closely with Justice, to make sure that we are well equipped in every instance. This is, this is a dispute, if you were to look at it at its most literal, between the proponent, or the operator, I should say, Enbridge, and the state. But having said that, there's a lot at stake for our provinces. There is a lot at stake nationally, and therefore the federal government is watching this like the hawk. And I will say that we are watching it almost on a minute-by-minute basis, and we will be absolutely prepared and ready to intervene at exactly the precise moment.
Mr. Housefather, you have 45 seconds. Please make it short.
I will. I think I'll just finish by saying, Minister O'Regan, I very much appreciate that. I think, though, that while it's clear you don't want to negotiate in public, that the legal position of the Government of Canada is core to this committee's understanding of our strategy on Line 5. And whether it has to be in camera, in a private session or in a public session, I would like to see the legal advisor to the Government of Canada come before this committee and explain the legal position of Canada to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez 6 minutes.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to say hello to all of the colleagues, and I'd like to thank today's witnesses. First of all, I'd like to ask you a question about Line 5. Has an impact study been done with respect to job loss on a province-by-province basis?
Normal impact study. I'm not entirely sure of that, to be blunt with you, but we know very well how many jobs are at stake. We know very well about its impact on energy security. We know how vital it is, for instance, to Sarnia, to the workers there, to the local economy. 5,000 direct jobs, 23,000 indirect jobs in Sarnia. It's the source of 53% of Ontario's crude, of 66% of Quebec's via Line 9. And we're talking about 4 refineries that are supplied by Line 5 in Ontario, and 2 in Quebec, in Montreal and in Lévis.
In your opinion, if we're unable to get supplies elsewhere through other means, do you think that's an issue?
Well, it's a hypothetical and one that I'm very confident won't arise. But but it is worth exploring that, just so that we all understand what's at stake. People aren't going to go cold. It just means that energy, those molecules, are going to have to be transported either by rail, by truck, or by marine transportation. But they will have to get the source, because people will not be kept cold. That's for sure. And I draw attention to the editorial that was written and seemed to be singularly directed at Governor Whitmer from the Detroit News last week, to say, one of the reasons why Michiganders remained warm, where so many other bordering states, particularly further down south Texas, people went cold, was because of Line 5. Because Line 5 supplies 65% of the propane needs of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, 55% of the statewide propane needs. 28% of the feedstock for production for jet fuel at Detroit Airport. This is significant for them, for refineries in Michigan, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, all dependent on that line for their continued operations. 2 refineries in Toledo, Ohio are at risk of shutting down if Line 5 shuts down. You're talking thousands of direct and contracted skilled trade jobs at risk, $5.4 billion in annual economic output. A shutdown of Line 5 would cause over 14 million gallons a day supply shortage in the region. For Michigan alone, it would face over 750,000 gallons a day propane shortage. That's significant.
That being said, we know that the pipeline seems to have been protected by the 1995 agreement that said that pertains to transit pipelines between Canada and the U.S. Is there a real chance of a shutdown? Because it seems to me that this is highly unlikely to occur.
I am heartened by the fact that there was just a court decision rendered now in Michigan that said to the state and to Enbridge, you got a month to find a mediator. That means the process is moving. It is ongoing. I would rather see this resolved yesterday, but I think I take that as a very hopeful sign that the court is very interested in the parties coming to an agreement of their own accord. That is our preferred option. That this be done quickly and that it be done by the principals involved, again, which is Enbridge in the state of Michigan. We are just preparing for we're preparing for any other outcome.
Monsieur le Président, combien de temps?
How much time do I have remaining, Mr. Chair? You have 2 minutes remaining. Thank you. If I I listened to your presentation, but no studies have been done on the potential for job loss. We don't know if there will be other supply sources. In case of Quebec, there may be another way of finding supplies, and probably there'll be with the agreement, the shutdown will be improbable. What about a potential for catastrophe if this pipeline is useful? We know that we're aware of the fact that should there be any risk to water bodies, this must be taken seriously. What about the case of Quebec? Where does the problem lie there?
Well, let me be very clear with the honourable member. While I'm not aware of a formal strategy or a formal impact that has been done, I'm just being very clear with you. Since this most recent development with the state of Michigan, we have a very good handle on what the impact would be because we know how important Line 5 is now. So we know what the lack of Line 5 would be. And that's why, first and foremost, the most important plan for us is to prevent that shutdown. That's what we're working on every day. It's full court press at the political level, at the diplomatic level. This is an existing and operating pipeline. It does not represent an increase in production. It delivers a much needed product to the United States, and it has done so for 65 years. It's integral to their energy security, just as is, to ours. So let me be very clear. The U.S. needs the product. They rely on it. Michigan relies on it to heat its homes. 65% of its propane needs in the Upper Peninsula, 55% statewide from Line 5. It's a lifeline for refineries in Ohio, in Toledo, and also for the petrochemical industry in Quebec. So for the two refineries that are directed by Line 5 and Line 9, which are in Lévis and just outside Montreal. It's also a lifeline, as I said, for refineries in Ohio, at least two in Toledo. Ohio would have to close in the event of a shutdown due to insufficient supply. This is a product that will still head southbound, but without Line 5, that means it will be on rail, it'll be on truck, it will be on ship, all of which are less reliable. And with regard to oil by rail and the tragedy of Lac Mégantic in 2013, far less safe.
Merci, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Mr. Blakey, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I think one of the important distinctions for New Democrats between the debate around Line 5 and debates that have been had and are ongoing around the TransX pipeline and Keystone XL are that, Line 5, first of all, is an existing piece of infrastructure. It's not a new build, and it doesn't depend on increasing, production per day and the rate of extraction in order to bring economic benefit to Canada. And the other piece, of course, is that Line 5 supports value-added jobs, so that it's not just a question of rip and ship or taking raw natural resources and shipping them somewhere else for the value-added work to be done. So those are important things. But you mentioned in your opening statements how proud you are of the work you did advocating for Keystone XL, which of course is one of those projects that depends upon an increased rate of extraction in order to be viable. And I'm wondering if, as the Minister of Natural Resources and who's playing an important role in Canada's energy strategy, if you could share with the committee what Canada's current greenhouse gas emissions are, and what they have to be in order for Canada to meet its commitments under the Paris Accord by 2030.
First of all, I'm very glad that the honourable member, talked about the distinction that exists, between, what makes Line 5 very different in that it is operational. And in fact, with Secretary Granholm, it is something that, I brought up with her, the fact that there was broad support along the political spectrum for this project. And, I think that is something that she took to heart. I understand where the honourable member is going about, because it does, to some people, it does appear contradictory that we would be, I think, the most ambitious government in Canada's history on combating climate change. And yet I am very proud of the oil and gas industry and very proud of the people who work in it. I was just, discussing, I discussed this with several people, but, discussing with the Alberta Building Trades just this morning, these are the people that we will need in order to lower emissions. These are the people that we will need that managed to find a way to extract oil from sand and make us the fourth biggest producers of oil and gas in the world. That it takes an awful lot of ingenuity and determination and hard work. And, I can tell you that I am probably living in one of the few provinces that is increasing flights. We're seeing one flight was just added, I believe, between Deer Lake and Toronto. And that's all the workers that travel every single day from my province to Alberta and Saskatchewan every day, every week to do their shifts and to do their work in the oil and gas industry in those two provinces, as well as the oil and gas industry here. Retaining those workers, keeping those workers is absolutely my top priority, because they are the ones who will lower emissions, and they were the ones who are going to revolutionize the energy sector in this country. They are the ones who are going to help us lead the world in it, and they are the ones who are going to help us achieve to lower emissions and achieve our Paris targets.
Well, I certainly agree with you as a construction electrician myself, and a proud member of the IBEW, that tradespeople are going to be the ones who help transition us to a lower carbon economy. But we're also going to need a government that is bearing in mind what our current emissions are and what our goals are. So I'm wondering if you can share with the committee what Canada's current greenhouse gas emissions are and where we need to be by 2030 in order to meet our Paris commitments.
It is going to be ambitious, but first of all, we're heartened by the fact that the emissions intensity of the oil patch continues to decrease. We are heartened, I think, by the fact that the marketplace is moving significantly. This is something that we saw in the beginning of last year, pre-pandemic, when you had BlackRock, the biggest private asset manager in the world, divesting itself from the oil patch. That was a clear warning sign that we had that frankly, investors around the world are going to be investing in areas primarily in jurisdictions that take combating climate change seriously. So we've got to lower those emissions. It's why carbon capture and sequestration was something that I was discussing, a strategy I was discussing just yesterday with Minister Savage and Minister Nally in the government of Alberta, and something that I continued with Secretary Granholm. Getting carbon capture and sequestration right is absolutely essential, not only, frankly, for lowering emissions in the oil patch, but also for what I believe to be a burgeoning hydrogen industry in this country.
But of course, the Paris Accord doesn't talk about emissions intensity, it talks about emissions. So I'm wondering if you could share with the committee what our current emissions are and what they need to be by 2030 in order for us to meet our obligations under the Paris Accord. I think Canadians who are concerned about climate change are concerned to know whether the person responsible for the government's planning of the energy sector has these issues foremost on his mind, and whether there's actually targets that you're bearing in mind when you're talking about planning projects, and when you're going to be talking about presumably some kind of continental energy strategy with the United States, which I think is implicit in some of the remarks that you made today, committee.
Well, it's implicit. It's also, I think, very good news for our companies, too, in order to make sure that they have a level playing field in which to operate. For the past 4 years and even preceding that. So
by how much do we need to reduce our emissions by 2030? Because I've only got a few seconds left here, Mr. Minister. By how much do we have to reduce our emissions by 2030? And what are you doing to put Canada on a track to get there?
You're quite right to say that there's a big difference between the intensity of emissions and overall emissions, and lowering those overall emissions. Again, to emphasize the fact that what we're talking about here is net zero. So that's why carbon capture and sequestration is vitally important. There will still be emissions that come from the oil patch and from other sectors of our economy. So we have to make sure that we look after those. We sequester emissions where we can. It's an emerging technology, but it is going to be absolutely fundamental to our climate plan. And again, our climate plan, which is the most ambitious that we've ever seen, is one that was just announced in December, and it requires all of our departments to work together with the leadership of the Prime Minister and work very closely with the provinces, which is something that I've worked very hard to do.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. We will now start round two. And Mr. Holbach, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us here this afternoon. Minister, Line 5 is definitely a huge concern for me coming from Saskatchewan, and it's nice to see that you're taking it seriously. And I have to say, Keystone is also something that's very dear to our hearts here in Saskatchewan. And our Premier is very upset that we weren't more aggressive and weren't more involved in defending Keystone. And what we're doing now, it seems like we're doing nothing, yet we have lots of allies in the U.S. who would like to see Keystone proceed. So are you putting any efforts in working with those allies to see if we can revive and change the decision on Keystone?
I've got another meeting coming up with a former colleague of yours, of course, James Rashad, to find out exactly, what the lay of the land is, on a whole host of energy issues. On Line 5 is, absolutely top of mind. And as I said to you, Mr. Hoback, James, myself, Minister Savage, worked very closely together. And, it's not to say that I am greatly disappointed and personally disappointed in the Keystone XL decision made by the president. We all of us put a lot of effort into it. As I said, particularly because of the changes that TC Energy had made. I think, oil will be transported to the U.S. Oil will be transported in this country. Making sure that it is done safely and as responsibly as we can possibly do is very important. And I have not seen a pipeline that met the mark more than the Keystone XL project of 2020. So, there are certain lessons to be learned there for sure. Yeah. Line 5, for a whole host of reasons, is a different piece. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay.
So, it's time. I'd like to talk to you for 30 minutes if we could. But you made a comment about how improved our oil and gas sector is and how much more we're regulated and responsible with the environment. I think you'd agree with me on those comments. So as you talk about the roadmap with the U.S., are you seeing the U.S. then changing their regulations? For example, on flaring, are they going to match Canadian regulations on things like that? Are they going to match the processes that Canadian companies have to go through to build things like pipelines? Is that going to be consistent in the U.S. now as it is in Canada? Because we know what's happened here in Canada with our process is all we've done is drove in cash and investment into the U.S. So do you see that playing field leveling off, and how do you see it leveling off?
Well, they're intent on meeting their Paris targets and lowering emissions.
That's different. It comes back to a North American continent and talking about creating a competitive platform for investment. So
no, not investment. I understand your point, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Is that you can't. The road to net zero goes right through oil and gas. The road to net zero goes right through oil and gas producing provinces like mine. There's no question about it. So they have to deal with these things. One would think, I'm sure, I'm not going to presume, but I think one would think that they are going to go in exactly the same direction that we are, and I think it would just increase investment and interest in continuing to lower those emissions. If these are comparable standards, I mean, that is exactly where we want to get.
So then, if we see the standards consistent, we see the costs here in North America go up because of these new standards. Are we going to do something to make sure other continents around the world, or other countries around the world, would come up to those standards? And what does that look like? I know there's been talk about a border adjustment type tax on pollution. Do you see us doing that in harmonization with the U.S.? And if that's the case, what does that mean for Ontario and Quebec and Eastern Canada that brings in so much oil outside of Canada?
Yeah, Mr. Hoback, I know that Minister Ng is going to be appearing in front of you. I'll probably best leave those answers, those questions to her. I mean, albeit though, we are heading in the same direction. There is a tremendous amount of, I think, opportunity. I think, a lot of our companies, have had a very, I think it's fair to say, a very difficult time as we've, increased our standards in order to make them more competitive for a day that we knew would come, which is, that the rest of the world is increasing their standards in order to lower emissions. And now that the Americans are on board, I think that you're going to see a big switch in the market. Market is drawn towards stability and security, where we can, and certainty, and where we can provide those things, I think, by working together with the Americans. That's what we want to do. We want to draw more investment into lowering emissions, which we're going to need private capital in order to be able to do that. And in other areas where we may be able to generate energy without necessarily increasing emissions, like in renewables. And I know that's a particular passion of Secretary Granholm. That requires investment. You want to create a investor certainty.
Okay. Now, when
Mr. Hoback, thank you. The time's out. Thank you very much.
Use the half hour.
Thank you very much. Next question goes to Ms. Romanato for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Minister. It's a pleasure to see you again. And I just have to say, I agree that the Canada-U.S. relationship is like no other. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight the people of Gander and how they hosted thousands of stranded passengers after 9/11. And I think that clearly demonstrates that relationship. So I have to bring that up, of course. So I want to just follow up on some of my colleagues' questions. There was an article in the La Presse back February 13th titled L'oléoduc que le Québec a oublié.
The pipeline that Quebec forgot.
And it's almost as if Quebecers don't realize the importance of Line 5, and that in 2015, the reversal of Line 9B to get crude to Quebec refineries. And in the article, the journalist mentions, and I'll quote in French, that in the event that, of course, the Line 5 were to close down,
if the pipeline is shut down, Quebec would have to turn to foreign markets to get supplies. In Montreal, the pipeline will have to go to get oil otherwise.
The impact of the closure of Line 5, is it possible that we will end up having to import oil from other countries rather than getting it from Alberta, Saskatchewan, because of that closure? We want to rely on our own oil and gas industry. Is it also possible that we are going to have a lot more oil and gas being transported by rail? And you had mentioned Lac Mégantic, which is very still much in Quebec's footprint and our minds and our hearts. Can you elaborate what, if it is in fact a possibility that the closure of Line 5 will have major impact, not only in terms of safety of transport of oil, but also in terms of where we get our oil? If you could elaborate a little bit.
I think I think there are contingency plans that are created, but it is very important for me to say that I am very confident in the continued operation of Line 5. The continued operation of Line 5 is non-negotiable. But I think there's if you look at what the impact could be were it not operational, which is why the stakes are high, I would make the argument that product will get to market. It is how it will get to market, and it will be by truck with a jammed up 401. It will be by rail, and possibly by ship as well. It will get to market. It will not be anywhere nearly as safe as Line 5 has proven to be over many, many, many decades. That is something that that has stood the test of time. I think it's also important to mention too that Enbridge is looking at significant investments. I think around $100 million in order to make sure that at the Strait of Mackinac, that the pipeline is deeper beneath the lake bed and encased in concrete, to make sure that nothing happens in the Great Lakes. So it has been proven to be, over the course of time by the U.S. government's transportation department. They have an agency that looks after these things, hazardous materials and shipments, and they've rendered it safe. Everybody's rendered it safe, and permitting for the improvement to Line 5 continues. That permitting by the state of Michigan. I am very hopeful. More than that, I shouldn't say hope. Hope has nothing to do with it. I am confident that the state and Enbridge are going to come to an agreement. I feel even more confident with the recent court decision to make sure that they have a mediator and that mediator is chosen within the month.
Mr. Romanato, 20 seconds.
Yeah, very quickly. You mentioned I know you won't negotiate in public, and I don't expect you to, but I know that you've been having those conversations with your counterparts, as you've mentioned, the Secretary of State of Energy. What other, unfortunately, I'm looking at the time and you're not going to be able to answer, but please continue having those talks, and we hope that you're very successful in mitigating this. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Romanato. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez deux.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Regan said that he would be talking with Joe Biden's representative for the energy sector as soon as he'd be confirmed in order to support the maintenance of Line 5. I'd like to know if this has been done, and if so, what will the approach be? What's the strategy of the government with respect to the representative? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I did. I spoke with her yesterday morning, the first international call that she made, which is in keeping with what all of the president's cabinet ministers have been doing, which is a refreshing change. I should mention that I had a very good relationship with her predecessor, Dan Brouillette, through, I think, last year through some fairly turbulent times. I checked this just a few moments ago, and Brent oil right now is sitting at $66, and Western Canadian Select is at 52. It was at negative 35 this time 11 months ago, and through some very troublesome times, turbulent times last year for our energy sectors. He was a very steady hand at the wheel and had a clear understanding of how integrated our markets are. To Secretary Granholm's credit, as a governor of Michigan, she also has a very, very clear eye on how integrated our markets are, not just on energy and pipelines and hydropower, and propane and Line 5. Should also mention too that she was a very steady hand at the wheel during the recession of 2008, 2009, which you'll recall hit our automotive sectors on both sides of the border quite dramatically. She was governor of Michigan at the time, and is keenly aware of how many times an auto part and a car as it's built crosses our border, and the importance of making sure that we get our border strategy correct. So it's within that frame of mind that she views Line 5, and therefore I'm very confident, therefore, that she wants a constructive relationship.
Monsieur Tremblay, you have 30 seconds.
So I understand the dialogue has already started, but we know that there's a real citizens' concern with respect to the environment. Do you feel that the fears of the governor are well-founded?
No, I do not. No, I do not. This is a safe pipeline. It has always been a safe pipeline. The owner is taking further measures to make sure that it has continued safe operation. It has served hundreds of thousands of people very well, if not millions of people, I should say, not only in Canada, but also in the United States.
Thank you, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. Mr. Blakey, you have 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Canada's refining capacity has decreased drastically over the last 20, 30 years. It seems to me that at a time when we need to be looking at reducing our carbon emissions, rather than emphasizing the rip and ship model, we should be looking at how we create more employment and more value out of the oil and gas that we do extract. So, Keystone XL is not a model for that. TransX is not a model for that. What is your government strategy for ensuring that more of the value-added work in the oil and gas industry happens in Canada, rather than continuing the trend of taking more out of the ground and sending it elsewhere to be refined and upgraded?
Two very important things that came out of last year. One would be our clean fuel strategy, which it's very interesting. I mean, not only are we, our refineries within Canada going to have to retool in order to meet that standard, the Americans are already on it. There are American refineries that are already retooling their processes in order to produce product that meets the new Canadian clean fuel standard. So, that's the thing about the Americans.
So how does that create more jobs in Canada? How does that create more value-added jobs in the oil and gas sector in Canada?
Well, watch this space, because I think that we're very keen to make sure that we provide domestic supply within our own country as we meet the new clean fuel standard. The other point I was going to make was on hydrogen.
What investment? So we know that you've invested in the rip and ship model by buying the TransX pipeline and committing to expanding it. What investments have you made in value-added work in Canada?
We have $1.5 billion dedicated towards clean fuels and hydrogen.
And does that mean new refining and upgrading capacity in Canada?
Well, it could very well. Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at.
It could, but you don't know. There's no plan on the books for that.
We have a hydrogen strategy that we just announced only 3 months ago.
Could you name a project for refining oil and gas that we take out of the ground here in Canada?
I have great faith that if you set the parameters and if you provide investor certainty, then the marketplace will come to bear. And we are seeing that happen right now globally as the market now looks to lower emissions.
So can you name a project for increased value-added work right here in Canada today?
I am looking forward to investors pointing the way and pointing to where their investments should go.
So you don't have a plan yourself then? And you're not aware of any
projects. It's a capitalist country, Mr. Blakey. This is we drive investment. We provide the parameters and the certainty in order to drive investment. It will be the marketplace that makes sure that this is a sustainable change to a lower emission future.
Well, that doesn't sound like a government with a plan for value-added jobs in Canada.
Thank you, Mr.
Absolutely incorrect.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. We'll go now to 5 minutes to Mr. Hoback.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I get another 5 minutes, so I appreciate that. I'm going to continue along the same lines. So, Mr. Regan, you talked about our sector, the oil and gas sector in Canada, and how it's the best in the world in regards to its imprint on the environment. So if you truly believe that, wouldn't you want to displace oil from other countries? So wouldn't you want to have our oil and gas on the marketplace versus gas coming from countries that are very harmful to the environment? And if so, what are you doing to make sure that happens?
Well, I think the same answer, Mr. Hoback, here. I mean, it's incumbent upon the government in order to set the right standards, in order to provide an environment for investor certainty. And then, the marketplace does work its way. I mean, these are.
I think the market's been very clear to this government that what you set for standards and for certainty is unworkable. And if you look at the investment in our sector over the last 4 years under the Liberal government, that money's all gone south. It's all gone into the U.S. It's gone to other areas because reality is they could never find certainty or bankability going through the process that you put in place for them to proceed with a project. So what do you see changing to improve that? Because if the U.S. is going to go down the same path as what we've done over the last 4 years, that means Texas won't be developing anything either. And what does that mean for North America? Does that mean we're going to allow cheap oil from other countries with no environmental regulations at all into Canada and North America, or what are we going to do for supply?
I think that that's utterly incorrect. I think that what we have managed to do over the last few years, we've seen a market increase in investment. If you look at LNG Canada, which is the single biggest private sector investment in this country.
We've got one project to talk about, but when you look at the oil and gas sector,
Nova Gas 2021, which we approved, thousands of jobs being created through that. Not only that, but through the current process, we were able to work with First Nations to make sure the consultations were extended. We work with the government of Alberta. NGTL 2021 is being built. It was approved. Line 3 pipeline, which we permitted in 2016, we approved it. 7,000 jobs created. Well, with all due respect, these are projects that never seem to get mentioned when I get questions in the House of Commons.
I think you've got to take a fight reality and take
These are very important projects that employ thousands of people in this country.
Not billions of dollars in investment out of Western Canada and loss of jobs. And you say you don't want to leave anybody behind? I don't either, but you have left thousands of Canadians here in Alberta and Saskatchewan behind. And you basically shrugged your shoulders and said, fine. But now when you see all of a sudden there's a possibility of huge job losses in Ontario and Quebec and huge
utterly false
for Eastern Canada.
Gentlemen, you can't talk over each other because the interpreters are not able to do that. So one at a time, please.
I agree. But, the point has to be made, and I'm not going to be BS'd here. Reality is we've seen what's happened here in Saskatchewan, Alberta with the choices of this government. It's been very clear. It's been clear in the marketplace with just the flow of capital out of Western Canada. And yet now he says the U.S. is our best friend and they're actually going to follow us. Well, I don't believe that. So either two things are going to happen. Either they're going to get more expensive, which means we're going to drive more foreign oil into Canada and U.S., or they're not going to follow us and we're going to have to lower our standards and our regulations to follow them. Or we're going to continue to see Alberta and Saskatchewan's oil and gas sector decline and decline and decline. So which is it? It's a very simple place in the marketplace. So what are you going to do to make sure that that's a level playing field? So are you going to bring the U.S. regulations up? Are you going to make sure that there's a process in place to keep that unenvironmentally friendly oil out of North America? What are you going to do?
I can't answer that question without taking umbrage with what you said earlier about we're not doing anything.
Come out TMX, west, my friend.
Please don't overtalk it. It's
one at a time.
Hard on the translators. TMX, we approved it, we bought it, we're building it, 7,000 jobs created. Line 3 pipeline, we approved it, 7,000 jobs created. NGTL 2021, we approved it, permitted it, thousands of jobs are going to be created there. LNG Canada, we're building it, thousands of jobs. Orphan and inactive wells during this pandemic, $1.7 billion for energy workers in this country, in BC, Alberta, and in Saskatchewan, and as well here in Newfoundland and Labrador. $1.7 billion with $400 million for my province here. And the wage subsidies helped out more than 500,000 workers keep their jobs in a pandemic in Alberta alone. That's a record I'll stand by, and that's a record we'll build on.
You know what? There's a record that you have, and there's the potential that we lost. And the opportunity cost that you put in place here, the amount of jobs that were lost under your government has been phenomenal. What you've done to the economy in Western Canada has been untouchable. And it's done so much harm to our country nationally. And now you say that we've done a good job. Well, what did you have to do? You had to buy a pipeline in order to see it finished, because you created such an environment that the private sector would never invest in it to see it through. They didn't have confidence in your process to say, I'm going to risk the money there. And now we see what's that happening with Keystone. So, you know,
Mr. Holbach, you're running out of time. I want to give the minister a short time to answer the question.
I'm sure you do.
I can't do anything about the price of oil. I can do, quite a bit with everything else that I'm given. And, I know a couple of things. I will take no advice from a member who's, sat in the government who thought that saying that our biggest competitor and ally was brain dead if they didn't go along with what we thought. That strategy obviously didn't work.
Minister, actually the round doesn't work. The round is over. The round is over. We've gone beyond time. The round is over.
The Premier of Alberta.
The round is over. We've gone over time. I want to give the last question to Ms. Bendayan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing today. Obviously, as you can see, a lot of very passionate folks around the table here as we discuss the Canada-U.S. relationship. And I would like to just take it back to last week and to the important bilateral that the President had with our Prime Minister. It seems to me that there are enormous opportunities going forward, whether, as you say, it's with respect to hydrogen. You mentioned minerals in your opening statement. I wonder if you can identify some of the things that make you hopeful about our future relationship with the United States, some of the opportunities that would be presented to our small and medium-sized businesses here in Canada, and how you think we can move forward from here.
Well, I think there's a tremendous amount of growth that we could see in clean growth, clean energy, for instance, in looking at smart grids and looking at energy efficiency. We're investing over $1 billion in energy efficiency alone, and I am a big believer in it because I grew up in Labrador, in a town called Happy Valley Goose Bay. I was isolated at the time. The federal government, when it announced big things or big programs, never seemed to affect my community. So what I love about, for instance, retrofits, which is something that my counterpart in the United States is looking at as well, is that it affects where you live. It affects where you work. You're improving. So in other words, the jobs are created in your community. And the International Energy Agency, whose meetings now I attend fairly regularly, have identified energy efficiency in home retrofits, for instance, commercial retrofits, as being the world's hidden fuel. It could get us anywhere from 30 to 40% towards our Paris targets. So these are small little things, but done en masse together across this country can help us meet those targets. And we're willing to look at anything really. If it seems like it's a good idea, it helps us lower emissions and protect our workers. Tidal Energy in Nova Scotia, we put $9.4 million towards that. We're putting money towards geothermal energy in Alberta. We've got $15 million towards a solar farm in Alberta. We were building solar farms in Prince Edward Island. And in the throne speech, we committed to working on the Atlantic Loop, which in effect would get the Maritimes off of coal. So, all of these things will help us lower emissions. All of these things will create jobs.
Thank you, Minister. And I guess picking up on a conversation earlier about, the market economy and the fact that we do want to lower emissions. As somebody who's very concerned about the environment, I can't help but think that, as you mentioned earlier, given that the demand is still there, should there be a problem and Line 5 not be operational, you mentioned that we would be moving by truck, you mentioned by rail as well, in addition to some of the dangers and security issues that are involved with transporting crude in that way. Would it not also increase emissions were we to move by rail and by truck rather than through the pipeline?
Absolutely, it would. Absolutely, it would. Which is, yet another argument in our arsenal. And just to emphasize the point that we are looking at absolutely every single thing that we could be doing in order to make sure that Line 5 is maintained, that it continues operation. It is integral to the energy security of our country. It is integral to Alberta for jobs, but also especially for Ontario and Quebec. It is essential that we get this right. We are determined that we will. Supply chains may adjust themselves, but they have their limits. And frankly, the best way to get this product from point A to point B to make sure that homes are heated is through a pipeline.
Ms. Bendayan, 45 seconds, please.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I would just mention that at the last meeting, we discussed the importance of a Team Canada type approach, a lobby effort in which we were all involved and in which we were all on the same page. Minister, given that you'll be leading much of this charge, I wonder if there is any message to opposition parties, to premiers, to Canadians listening as to how we can all be working together in order to ensure that we get this right and that we get this done.
We need to work together. It's too essential. It is essential not only for our country's energy security, it is essential to the binational relationship that we have with the United States. And Canada is expected to lead on lowering emissions. And it is a challenge. There's no question. We are the fourth biggest producers of oil and gas in the world. We are also the largest democracy with the greatest bounty of natural resources in the world. So how we do it is transparent, but the world is watching us, and they don't have much time, nor do most Canadians, on matters of such importance with people fighting all the time. I've made it a top priority of mine to make sure that I work with our provincial ministers, but particularly those provincial ministers of energy producing provinces. And it will, and it has been bearing fruit. Things are getting built in this country. We will lower emissions. We will create jobs.
Thank you, Mr. O'Regan. Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know out of a busy schedule,
this is very important,
especially with the new administration. So thank you very much for on behalf of all my colleagues. I want to thank you for answering our questions and responding to our concerns. And we look forward to carrying on the conversation. Now we will move to the officials. So thank you again, Mr. Reagan, again on behalf of the committee. Okay. So with the officials, the first question goes to the Conservatives, but I don't have a name. So whoever wants to take the question for 6 minutes.
That would be me, Mr.
Sorry,
Mr.
Sorry,
Chair.
Mrs. Alisev. You have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to start by exploring where and what the Americans have said and acted to date. They have been very clear in the messaging to us around self-sufficiency, repatriation of jobs, be that from the national security tariffs we saw on steel and aluminum to the tax reforms that incentivized American companies to repatriate jobs to the U.S., to signalizing that they want to modernize trade rules so that taxpayer dollars can spur domestic investment, to climate change, where obviously we've seen the cancellation of Keystone XL and now the controversy and the situation over Line 5. The message is serious. The opposition to decommission Line 5, not just to suspend the underwater portion, has been increasing since 2015, and now we have a looming deadline of May 2021, which is just around the corner. So my first question for the officials is, what possible outcome, what probability do we have in being able to turn this around before May?
As the minister said, we're quite confident that we will be able, of course, to turn and go beyond May. The recent decisions of the judge asking for a mediator between the parties actually had very good news. As the minister said, we also, of course, exploring all the other possibilities to make sure that the continuation of the pipeline is not at risk. That's for sure.
Well, unfortunately, there have been with Enbridge over 33 spills on line 5 of 1.1 million gallons. Line 6B, which is also in the Kalamazoo River in Michigan, has experienced a significant spill of 1 million gallons. And this is fueling the influence in the US. And the understanding that I have is that the US is saying it doesn't really affect us. It's oil from out west in Canada that's going to out east in Canada. So there's much more downside for us, the Americans. That's what I'm hearing from them. Than there is upside to continue. So I wonder if you could counter that. Why is it more in the U.S. best interest to keep Line 5 going underwater than it is to cancel that and go through with what the Michigan governor has said?
If you allow me, I will turn to Glenn, who's the ADM in charge of this issue. But before I turn to him, I just want to remind people there's 70 pipelines crossing the border, and there's 30 transmission lines. Our systems are totally integrated. Energy goes from south to north from south. It's beneficial for both countries. It's the way it has been. It's the way it is. It's also the same thing for Line 5. You've got some of that energy, as it was mentioned, that is going to Quebec and Ontario.
But I'm hearing that, in fact, that's not how it's being viewed. This particular
You're right.
aspect,
There's always proponents who are presenting things differently. But I will just, if you allow me to ask Glenn to provide you with some numbers of what exactly Line 5 provides and bring to United States economy and, of course, to United States people.
If I can, I'm short on time. So I just wanted to say, what is Canada's plan B? What is the government looking at a plan B? We're looking at over 2,100 truckloads a day. If this were to arrive, and it could arrive as soon as May 2021, what is Canada's plan B?
Our plan A is to make sure that the continuation of the pipeline is going to continue to operate. We're not working on the scenarios where it's not going to happen. We have discussions with provinces on a regular basis on what are the impact, how does that work, who's impacted by the pipeline, what exactly are the benefit of the pipeline for them. Of course, we are doing all our work at all levels with our friends in the US.
Well, we certainly hope that you're right. I'd like to talk quickly, though, about critical minerals, if I could. I know the United States has already a federal strategy to ensure secure and reliable supply of critical minerals. I know that the European Union has an EU raw materials strategy where they're looking at being independent from a critical mineral perspective, as does Japan and Australia. Could you share with us where is Canada's critical mineral list and where is Canada's strategy for self-sufficiency in this area?
Jeff, maybe you want to answer this question.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to perhaps address this question. So our strategy on working on critical minerals has been underway for a number of years. So you mentioned the EU, for example, and the United States. And so we have a working group with the United States that's been in place for well over a year, in which we're working on 5 specific areas. That includes industry engagement, joint research and development, defense supply chains, improving information on resource potential and mapping, and collaborating in multilateral fora. All that work has been underway. We're working on it. We have worked with the United States to continue that. And last week, the Prime Minister and President Biden continued that by reinforcing that we're going to focus on batteries.
Do we have a list of minerals that we consider?
Your time is up. Sorry. Next is Mrs. Robinato for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to give an opportunity for the ADM to talk a little bit about the impact of the closure of Line 5 on the United States, because he didn't have a chance to jump in there. And I thought maybe it'd be helpful if we could highlight some of the impact. As my colleague was mentioning, it sounds like very one-sided. This is all, Canadian oil going to Canada. But however, there is a lot riding on this in terms of the United States. So if you'd like to elaborate a little bit, and I'll have another question after that.
Thank you. I'd be very happy to. So, and I think this is really important that that we use this opportunity to really underline the impacts to the U.S., because it really isn't all the risk is being taken on by the U.S. and all of the benefits to Canada. That's not the situation at all. The Americans have a lot at risk with this pipeline, with the potential shutdown. Michigan has the highest propane consumption in the U.S. So the feedstocks from Line 5 are refined in Ontario, produce 65% of the propane for Michigan's Upper Peninsula and 55% of Michigan's statewide propane needs. And we've seen recently the impacts of potential impacts on those supplies to Michiganders. Line 5 also supplies essential feedstock for the production of jet fuel for the Detroit airport. It feeds refineries in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, which are dependent on the line for their operations. For example, there are 2 refineries in Toledo, Ohio, that would be at risk in the event of a Line 5 shutdown. We're talking about billions of dollars in annual economic output. And from an environmental perspective, this was raised. It would require approximately 2,100 tanker trucks per day leaving Superior and heading east across Michigan, and roughly 800 rail cars traveling on Michigan's rails to support the light oil and natural gas liquids that Line 5 moves each day. So this is not a Canada versus U.S. issue. Americans really benefit from the line's continued operation. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. And we heard on Tuesday and again today that we have a lot of tools in our toolbox in terms of bringing Line 5 and the arguments on both sides to a successful closure. And we heard that obviously we prefer a diplomatic solution, that we've been engaging with our counterparts, that this is an all hands on deck. We heard that there has been a mediator requested in the next month. Can we also talk a little bit about, is it possible that we would use the 1977 Transit Pipeline Treaty, should it need to be? And if you could explain a little bit to the committee, if we were to go that route, what would that look like?
We're looking at all the tools that we have in the toolkit. It's true. I think the best solution remains for an agreement between the Enbridge and the state. One thing that is interesting, we never heard the governor saying that she doesn't want the pipeline. She wants a pipeline with a tunnel, and Enbridge wants to build a tunnel. The issue is, when is the tunnel going to be in place versus when all of this is going to be fixed. So I think there's maybe a timing issue or a sequencing issue, but there should be at some point an agreement on this. On the treaty, I know as it was said, you met with people from GAC. It's under international treaty, are really under responsibility of GAC, so I would be very careful. And I'm not a lawyer, as opposed to some of you, so I will not go too far in terms of interpreting what the Treaty of 1977 said. As you know, the treaty was signed in the context of a potential pipeline from the north that hasn't been built, but it actually kind of has some measures that's supposed to guarantee the transit of pipelines that are going to Canada to US, as well as US to Canada. So we are looking at the treaty like we're looking at all the other tools that we have, of course. And the questions would be, which one do we need to use, to be honest?
Thank you. And my last question is, if it's possible to speak a little bit about some of the opportunities that we have with respect to electric vehicle, the circuit,
Wait.
Sorry, I'm going back and forth in my French and English because this was something that was discussed in the conversation with the president last week about the importance of a continental grid. And if you could talk a little bit about that.
But it's important that we have the same standards in the way the car industry is developing the electric vehicle. It's important that we can charge our vehicles on both sides of the border and have the capacity to do that. It's also important in an economy that is so integrated on the auto sector side, that we also have a supply chain for the critical minerals that are needed in the batteries that is safe, secure, and actually is beneficial for us. So there's a lot of elements that are very important for on both sides of the border, and that reinforce the needs for US and us to work together to make sure that we develop in North America standards, a way of working on EV vehicle, as well as a supply chain that will, of course, support our car industry. Molly Johnson is the ADM on this. If she wants to add anything, I would be more than pleased.
I'm sorry, we're out of time. We can save that comment next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Next up is Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. Vous avez 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask the same questions that I had asked to the minister earlier. Hopefully I'll get answers from the officials. A potential job loss in Quebec, what do you think that will be if Line 7 doesn't go through? And could you elaborate on that? I think we taking the threat seriously. The American governor said that when she wants to shut down a pipeline, now we have to take it seriously. We also have 3 cases before the court right now. That's serious. It's very difficult to assess how many jobs could be lost because, as you pointed out, and others have as well, the supply chain has some flexibility. Yes, some are going to try and ship by train or other by trucks, but there are limits there, and it's not more safe than a pipeline. I think we have to look at the case of Line 5 because it's a question of energy security. We're talking about families, businesses that may be deprived of energy. As was said, in Michigan, they rely on propane. They use propane a lot in Michigan in the winter to have access to heating. Well, that's something that's vital. So, and to go back to a comment that was made earlier, in the United States, often they focus on the economic agreements but this is an energy argument, a supply problem for the North American population. Thank you. It's already clearer than what we heard earlier. So if I understand correctly, one of the reasons why we need to promote the pipeline rather than the train or trucks, we know what happened in Quebec with the train accident. So we have to look at the safety angle. But in that case, do we have to look at the various the differences in the regulations, or what? I was Deputy Minister of Transportation. We have to ensure that all transportation modes are safe. Pipeline is a lot more efficient. It doesn't emit greenhouse gases. It doesn't cause traffic congestion. And look at the issue of rail transport. Farmers use rail to transport. Same thing for other sectors as well. So we can't transport cars by pipeline. We can't transport foodstuffs by pipeline, but we can for oil. It's very, very effective. So that's why I say it's the safest way, and it's the most efficient way as well. In Quebec, the farmers don't use propane so much in Quebec, except in the small homes in the forestry, in the forest, in wooded sections. I remember that from my youth. We don't use as much propane in Quebec. That's true. Not in Canada, but but we do use propane. But in Michigan, they use it a lot more than other states do. In terms of job loss, Enbridge talked about 600 employees. Are the jobs, are those accurate? I haven't confirmed their figures. Glenn?
They seems to be actually quite low numbers for me, des chiffres qui sont assez bas.
I find the figures quite low.
Oui,
yes. I was listening to the minister who talked about thousands of jobs being lost. So I was a bit surprised when I hear that particular figure. What you, as a minister said, the pipeline generates and fuels an economy that is much larger than just 1,000 employees. When you're talking about the Detroit airport, the Toronto airport, we're talking about tens of thousands of people who work in these airports, so it's very important. And, Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left? 1 minute. 1 minute. You said that the transportation modes were safe based on your experience as the Deputy Minister of Transportation, but we saw what happened with deregulations. We saw an increase in the amount of oil that's been transported. And the minister himself used Lac-Mégantic as an example of why we shouldn't be using rail transport for oil. Do you share the same fears? I think that we have to ensure that all transport modes are secure. Mégantic was a horrible catastrophe, which should have never occurred, but unfortunately it did. And we're going to ensure that all transportation modes are safe. That's clear. But on a day-to-day basis, thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Thank you.
For the next 6 minutes, Mr. Blakey, please.
Thank you very much. Often in the discussion around America's Buy America policy, we think of things like buses, for instance, or construction in terms of bidding on public contracts. But I'm wondering if you've done an analysis of the ways in which the new Buy America proposals might affect Canada's natural resource industry, and if you could share with the committee what the expected impacts are.
I don't have such an analysis, and I think it's too early for us to have all the detail around this. But I will remind people that even in the context of, if you take softwood lumber, for example, our exportations are going very high those days, despite, as you know, the duties from the from U.S. Our relationship with U.S., we were talking about energy. Our exportation over there in energy good is probably above $92 billion per year. We're quite successful at getting our product in U.S. for most of the time, and in large part. We have inheritance with them on Buy America and other issues, but we find solutions too when we have a predictable partner. And I think that's the way we need to approach that relationship. It's not going to change from administration to administration. U.S. will always have those views of Buy America, like some Canadians sometimes have also those views. I think what we need to demonstrate to our partners is that we both benefit from the integration. It's not job that are produced in Canada are lost in U.S. It's actually the job produced on both sides create actually more jobs on both sides. And that's the way it has been working on the auto sector, for example. That's the way it works on the energy.
So am I hearing correct that there's no sense of urgency in the Department of Natural Resources around these Buy America policies, or concern that they'll affect the export of any primary industry products into the United States?
Everything is an urgency. So yes, there is urgency on establishing a relationship with US, with the new administration that is stable. That's why it was so important for the ministers to have the first call with the secretary. And that's what happened. It was important for the leader and the two leaders to meet together early on, and that's what they did. So I think the United States of America have also demonstrated their interest of working with US and establishing a fruitful relationship and a positive relationship. So yes, it's urgent for us to sit down with them and demonstrate how they benefit as much as we do from the integration of our market.
When I worked in the government here in Manitoba, I worked with a gentleman who had a saying, if everything is urgent, nothing is urgent. I think that's some pertinent advice for you. But what I'm
wish
hearing
he was
is,
right.
I think what I'm hearing is that there's no quantifiable concern about the potential impact of Buy America on the Canadian natural resource industry, which
I don't have numbers today to present or to share with you. That's true.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I guess this is more of a philosophical question. I was kind of taken aback by the minister's pivot, if you will, to the fact that Canada is a capitalist country and therefore wouldn't engage in any kind of industrial planning. You must look at what other countries do in respect to their natural resources. We've heard, I also sit on the trade committee. We've heard about how other countries have industrial plans for various natural resources sectors, despite themselves being capitalist countries. Do you think there's an inherent conflict between being a capitalist country and doing industrial planning?
I think we need to find the right incentive for the market to actually play the role that we expect they will play. So, and if you look at the climate change plan, it's basically what we're trying to do. When you look at the clean fuels, when you're thinking about CCUS and US and here, you're thinking about how do you create the incentive, as well as it's a mix of carrot and stick that you can use as government for the market to adjust, for the market to go in the direction that the future is demanding. That's not necessarily a industrial planification at the old Russians' way of doing things, if you allow me to say.
Although nobody was talking about that at committee today. We're just talking about government having a plan for an industry. One example of an industry we don't have a plan for that I wouldn't expect you to speak for, or two, because it's not a natural resource industry, is our airline industry. So for instance, Canada stands alone among our Western allies in not having any kind of meaningful strategy for the airline industry, whether we're talking about aerospace manufacturing or passenger air travel. There's no stated objectives. There's no clear policy for how to support the industry. We got a government that I think mistakenly thinks that just because they believe in the market, they're discharged of any duty to do any meaningful planning or having a meaningful policy approach to certain industries. And I don't think Canadians are well served by that.
If I can respond first, on our side, as you have noticed, we've got a hydrogen strategy that just was released, which is in some way a plan on how we will actually capitalize on the potential of hydrogen for the future. We have an action plan on SMR that was also launched in December. As one of my colleagues mentioned, we're working on critical minerals plan with provinces. We've been on this for a moment. So actually, we do work on plans. We also work with the industry on where should we go, how can we help, how do we work together on those issues. So,
well, I take it that the minister was mistaken then to appeal to capitalism to absolve himself of responsibility for doing any planning. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of my time.
Yes, Mr. Blakey, thank you very much. Right on time. The next 5 minutes goes to Mr. Straw for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And as we look at the Canada-U.S. relationship in relation to natural resources, I think we have to look at the last 4 years, certainly due to policy shifts, I would think, from both sides of the border. There was a massive expansion of oil and gas exploration in the United States, such to the point where they quickly became a net exporter of oil and gas for the first time, and they were no longer as reliant on foreign oil and gas as a result of expansion, specifically in the Permian Basin. At the same time, Canada saw a contraction of our energy sector. And I'm just wondering, do you, given the new direction of President Biden's administration and a number of signals that he sent, do we anticipate that there will be a contraction in the U.S. Oil and gas exploration market that might may be beneficial to Canadian oil and gas producers if they are no longer producing as much? He's talked about a ban on fracking, that sort of thing. Are there opportunities for Canada to be selling our oil and gas into the States more based on what we're seeing in the early days out of the Biden administration?
I think so. I think you're right. There's been a significant, and people forget to mention sometimes how big it is. 10, 20 years ago, we were talking about the fact that it was not enough oil and gas. And suddenly we end up in a surplus world where everybody was producing oil and gas. And that's a very big shift. Recently, we had the war in terms of price, the price war between some countries, which affect us tremendously. I think, when you look at the numbers now, we are actually exporting significantly into U.S. We were at 3.9 million barrels per day before the pandemic. We're back. We were at 3.7, I think, in November. So we're basically back where we were. There's Line 3, of course, that would increase the capacity to transport oil to U.S. TMX will do that too. We are a reliable partner for the U.S. If we keep going in terms of decarbonizing our industry, if we keep going with the best practice in terms of governance and social acceptance, if we continue to be a partner like that, there would be a market for us in the U.S. and there would be a market for us in the rest of the world. In all scenarios of net zero economy, there's a significant portion of oil and gas that remains for the next 20, 30 years. There's no reason why Canada will not be the supplier for this market.
Okay, I want to go back to a comment that you made in response to my colleague, Ms. Alislev, when you said there is no plan B. Now, I'm hopeful that might just be confidence that we can succeed in maintaining Line 5 and the tens of thousands of jobs that are attached to it. I remember when there was a disruption to rail service with rail blockades.
I was there.
Sorry, Daniel, I think your mic is still on there. Oh, yeah. So sorry, I'll just make that point again. There was a significant disruption to propane to Quebec and parts of Ontario through a rail blockade. It quickly became a crisis where there was rationing of propane in certain parts of the country. So I guess perhaps you can expand a little further. Yes, we all want to win this debate. I would say there probably was a similar, there's no plan B for Keystone XL, and now that's canceled. So I would hope there is a plan B and that government is actively working to see how we would keep those critical supplies of oil and the products that are created from it, and that we aren't simply relying on hoping that the courts go our way or that we can negotiate a settlement, or that this really isn't about Line 5, it's about political drama and political intrigue in Michigan. But I just have to say, I hope there is more planning going on behind the scenes. We all want Line 5 to continue to operate, but we sure expect there to be contingency plans in place. I'm hoping you can share a little bit more about what those are.
I'm sorry, Mr. Blakey, you're out of time, unless Monsieur Tremblay can answer in 15 or 20 seconds.
15, 20 seconds. Yeah. We, of course, like we did for at the time of the barricades, we have internal collaboration with our different departments on working on how do we work together in any circumstances. We also have, as I mentioned before, regular discussion with provinces, and we also talk to the industry for sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. Mr. Stry, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the officials who are guiding. And Mr. Tremblay, I want to thank you for your frankness. Sometimes we get officials who are not as frank and open as you, and I applaud that. I'm going to stay more focused on the Line 5. I'm more concerned. I think perhaps the issues being made much bigger, and if we can stay focused on it, we would be able to better deal with it. The real issue is the short part of the line that goes under a strait, which there is a application by the owner of the line to bore tunnels, encase it in concrete, and then have the pipeline go through to protect it. So it's not the entire line that is at risk. What is your conversations with officials in Michigan as well as the officials federally in the U.S., your counterparts there? How are their optimism on working out a solution for that, or accelerating perhaps permits to have that that short length built so that we can resolve this issue?
I will turn to Glenn, who has been in touch on a regular basis, especially with Enbridge, maybe to give us a sense of the current discussions that are happening at the state level.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you, Mr. Sarai. It's nice to see you again. So I maybe would deflect a little bit, given that the advocacy efforts are led by Global Affairs, and those officials have spoken, and we know the ambassador will be speaking with you as well. But maybe I could speak to the tunnel issue if that's okay. Certainly that you're right, Mr. Sarai. I mean, that is it is that 4.5 mile long segment in the strait that's at issue, and I'd just like to underline that that Enbridge is working toward the tunnel, which would move that segment of the pipeline underneath the strait, the riverbed, and so that's about a 4-year process. So they're working on the permitting. That permitting would go until about the end of this year or so, and then of course it's a fairly involved construction process, and so that's about a 3-year process. And so certainly we're looking for a solution that would allow for the continued safe operation of the pipeline in the interim, and we support the plan for the tunnel going forward.
And with your conversations with Enbridge and the official, the executives at Enbridge that are working with that, what is their optimism, or what is their feeling on getting this resolved and getting a solution, and also having an interim solution in terms of monitoring that length of the pipe? I understand there's divers that regularly check it. I understand that there's other means that they check it regularly, but what are they doing, and how has their dialogue and their correspondence been?
Sure. So they're of course very, very interested in having a negotiated solution, as the minister and I think the deputy mentioned. The court has ordered or directed for mediation between the state and Enbridge. I would also say that Enbridge has indicated publicly that they disagree with the state's order for a shutdown, and don't believe that the state actually has the authority to do so. I'm not a lawyer. I won't sort of comment on that, but that is their public position on it.
Mr. Tremblay, we heard from our minister that we have contingency plans in the event that we'd have to, whether we train it, whether we truck it, whether we ship it. That's for our needs. But has Michigan hinted or stated anything of how they would manage their energy needs if they shut down this Line 5?
It's the supply chain itself that finds its way. It's the way it works is, you've seen that it was some people, Mr. Straw referred to the barricades, for example, in the past. What happened at the time when the rail were stopped? It's the train used different rail to arrive to the station.
I'm sure the governor.
It's the same thing. I cannot speak for them. I don't know what they've done in terms of contingency plan. I don't know how far they've been on this. I know that they know that if there's no pipeline, there's actually consequences from a supply chain perspective. They've been told, and they know that. What have they done for their own sake, and what do they do in terms of planning? I don't have any idea, to be honest.
Thank you, Mr. Spry. Thank you. And we have Monsieur Savard-Tremblay for 2,5.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. My microphone was raised up, so you couldn't hear me. How much time do I have, Mr. Chairman? You're now on mute. You're still on mute. 2.5 minutes. Okay, 2.5 minutes. We are now working on strategy, business strategy for the oil sector with the United States. Tell me if I'm not asking this question to the right person, but hydrogen, is that an integral part of the strategy that was announced back December? If we read the document, hydrogen, clean hydrogen, can come from fossil fuels. There are several sources for hydrogen, and there's green hydrogen, which comes from clean energy sources. Do you not think that the fundings and grants for the business development plans should be focusing on hydrogen with really clean sources so that we could then sell to the United States? Our policy on that is to promote the production of fuels that are going to be cleaner. So it's really decarbonization of carbon. It's not a black and white issue. We look at the carbon intensity. We're fortunate here in Canada because we have so much capacity in order to make hydrogen in various ways. We can manufacture it with natural gas. We can sequester or capture carbon, and we can have carbon emissions that are almost neutral. So then there's hydrogen produced by hydroelectricity. So we're not, some people could say that you could make hydrogen and decrease greenhouse gases by using biomass. And if you do these calculations for carbon capture and sequestration for the production per se, so we're open to all scenarios. We want to promote the production of fuels that will be more and more green. And it's not just Canada. There are many other countries that are adopting a similar position. That doesn't prevent us from talking about green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, but the objective is to see how far we can go in decarbonizing carbon. Thank you very much, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Mr. Blakey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's any secret that with respect to many large energy projects, often when things have gone poorly, it's been as a result of there not being sufficient consultation with Indigenous peoples, and there's an interest by Indigenous peoples in the Line 5 pipeline as well. And so, part and parcel of having a good outcome there is consulting with Indigenous communities. I'm wondering what communities the Department of Natural Resources has consulted with in respect of Line 5.
Glenn, do you want to answer this one, especially on Line 5?
Yes, I guess I would say I'm not aware of any direct engagement with Indigenous communities to this point on Line 5. I guess I would just I would draw the distinction between engagement, which is very important, obviously, and the duty to consult, which is a distinction. So I guess I would just say, I think what we're talking about is engagement. To my knowledge, there has not been direct engagement with Indigenous communities on this issue to date.
Is there any plan for the department to engage with Indigenous communities on this question?
I'm not aware of any plans at this point, but I think that is definitely something that we should take under advisement.
It seems to me that would be something to get underway sooner rather than later. I don't have a lot of time remaining, but I do want to know, a new administration, of course, brings new opportunities, and one of the longstanding issues between Canada and the U.S. as yet unresolved is around softwood lumber. And I'm wondering what kinds of opportunities for a resolution you think may exist, and what steps the government plans to take in order to try and get fair treatment for Canadian softwood lumber at the border.
In 20 seconds or less, please.
Oh, 20 seconds. We always open to negotiate an agreement with US, but we need to make sure that they want to do the same. So as long as they are not, we will continue, of course, to win in front of any process that are created under the agreements, existing agreements. But our hope, of course, is as soon as possible, we can sit down with US and try to find an agreement for long term, for sure. In the meantime, our exportations are going well on softwood lumber despite this, which is quite positive.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Now we will go to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to the witnesses. I guess the first thing I would say is in listening very intensely to Minister O'Regan, certainly we appreciate the fact that he did come to our committee today. He speaks of, I believe it's 140 million gallons of crude through Line 5 daily. And then he spoke about 2,100 trucks and 800 rail cars to bring such across. And then he also spoke that he said to quote, "The road to net zero goes straight through our borders." And he went on to say that the supply chains will adjust themselves. And so it really, really concerns me, because in my fantastic riding of Essex, we rely heavily, very heavily, on our automotive industry, on our supply chain, as the minister spoke to, our manufacturing, and those types of things. But I really found it ironic when he said the road to net zero goes through our borders. Well, the truth of the matter is, Mr. Chair, it does go through our borders. But when we can't move people across our borders, that's equally a major issue. And to speak specific to Line 5, if we don't have petroleum coming across to Canada and going back to the States and servicing, then we don't have an auto industry. We've lost the manufacturing industry, and we're not putting food on the table. So my question specifically is, because I'm a real no nonsense kind of a guy, who do we need to contact in the U.S. to get this done once and for all? Is there a specific person? Is there a specific agency? What can we do? What can this committee do to create magic to really get this resolved? Because without that, we are going to be losing, and we've already lost, by the way, friends, many fantastic manufacturing jobs and businesses, and people don't know where to go, and we can't move product. We can move product, but we cannot move people across the border. Who do we have to get to as fast as we possibly can to get that job done?
I think, first of all, the minister said that the Line 5 was not negotiable, so I think he fully understands and appreciate the importance of the oil crossing the borders. On your questions, I think for the committee, coming with a report and after that, we'll make sure it's delivered. The fact that you demonstrate with this committee the importance of the relationship with U.S. and the importance of Line 5, the fact that those discussions, I hope, will reiterate the importance for Canadian and also for American of the integration of our market and the integration of our industry. And as you mentioned on the auto sector, it's exactly the same thing. And that we're bigger and better when we are integrated at two countries. I think if you can convey those messages, that would be, for me, seems to be quite positive. Our friends at GAC, and I know you're going to be meeting with officials from GAC and ministers later, are the ones who actually organize the diplomatic and the advocacy work in the U.S. I would invite you to ask them that questions. They would be probably more competent than me on this one.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess, again, I'm in such a hurry up mode because I've literally spending hours and hours on the phone with my local manufacturers, people that have nowhere to turn. They don't even know if their business is going to survive tomorrow. And so much depends specifically on Line 5. So much depends on manufacturing. These are Canadians. These are parents of children that don't know if they can put food on their table. Again, hurry up mode. We have to get to the end of this. We have to figure out the border problems, and it's not going to fix itself. We have to come to a conclusion, such as there are companies that are losing hundreds of millions of dollars.
Sorry, Mr. Lewis, you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. Locally, hand over fist, because we can't get people across the border to see their final product, which goes right back down to petroleum, which is automotive. And I guess instead of a question, I would just say, please really take my message to heart on this front. I'm trying desperately to not only save but create jobs for Canadians. And thank you very much for your time, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And the final question goes to Madam Mandayan.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Minister Tremblay, for your good answers. I'd like to clarify something. My colleague has just raised the issue of who should we be discussing this issue with? Who is the person that we need to convince? And yet, it seems to me that our government does have a strategy in place in order to be able to discuss this issue at all levels, at the state level, federal level. And therefore, we're not talking about one particular person who has the answer. We're talking about a comprehensive strategy. Could you perhaps clarify what this strategy is? And could you please clarify the approach taken by our government? And I know that you'll be hearing from the ambassador soon, and she will be in a better position than me to answer your question. But if you look at our relationship with the United States, you will realize that we've always worked jointly. We want to make sure that we work well with the Americans. And it's not just by taking a central government approach that we do this. We're talking about the unions, the lobbies. As was said earlier, there are a lot of people in Michigan who are going to benefit from this. So it's important to reestablish the facts. So those individuals who have relationships with journalists, unions, opinion leaders in the United States, we have to work together, but we have to deliver a coherent message. That's why I would invite you to raise this issue with GAC, because we want to be effective, and we need to present Canadian arguments in order to avoid situations where the perception is completely mistaken and as to what the benefits of the project is. Thank you very much. And so people-to-people ties become extremely important, just as we did when we negotiated the new NAFTA 2.0. I'd like to talk about the electrification system. As a proud Quebecer, I'm very proud of our hydroelectricity. And I was wondering whether, in your opinion, there are any opportunities that will open up for our markets exporting to the United States, given the discussions that took place last week with President Biden and with the counterpart. Yes, there are opportunities. Hydro-Quebec is very active in Maine and in New York. So discussions have been underway. There are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities for hydroelectricity and renewable energies, wind power that can be added to the transmission lines, which are very integrated between the United States and Canada. We have to take a look at that. We do have energy. We have electricity that is really good in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so we could help certain American states on that front. They would be able to come greener. That's a good opportunity. And yes, people will be against these projects sometimes, but we have to make sure that things are done properly. And so that one final question, Mr. Chair, Mr. Tremblay, earlier, we talked about the fact that we're in a capitalist country, a market system, and it seems to me, and you're an expert in this field, could you talk to us about the investors? It seems to me that the investors are following the ecological changes. Are today's investors looking for opportunities that are more ecological? Yes. And that's why I said that in the future, there will be a demand for gas and oil, but this demand will be very, it will be nuanced. People want to ensure that their investments are going to be put into businesses that respect the rules. So it's important that the leaders act appropriately and that, yes, all this is very important. We see this change is underway, particularly internationally. That's why it's important that we have an American ally that shares our same environmental values. And this is very important for us because it enables us to ensure that we make this transformation and we do so hand in hand with our biggest client. And when you talk, I'm spending some time with the oil sector this weekend. Our discussions are about this. How do we decarbonize? How do we use sequestration? How do we ensure that the oil is oil that people want, that reflects the values that people have? Thank you very much.
I appreciate the conversation. I want to thank the officials for taking the time and answering all the questions in the fulsome and comprehensive way. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time and for spending this time with us. I need to suspend for a few moments just to make sure that everybody leaves and we are able to bring Ambassador Hillman on. So just suspend for a few moments. before I introduce you, I want to just do some housekeeping. Welcome back, members. For the benefit of our new panel, I will first outline the procedures of our meetings. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would encourage all participants to mute their microphones when they are not speaking and address all comments to the chair. Interpretation is available through that globe icon on the bottom of your screen. Please note that screen captures or photos are not permitted. Thank you very much, Ambassador Hillman, for joining us today. I probably don't think you will remember, but I spent some time with you 3 years ago when I visited the embassy as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I was very impressed with the staff and all the colleagues that you have there with their professionalism and the way they conducted relations with one of our most significant partners and allies. So I want to welcome you. Thank you very much for taking the time. I understand you have some opening comments, so the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So I'd just like to say that in my time in Washington, I've seen firsthand the strength of the Canada-U.S. relationship in general and our economic relationship in particular. Environ 2.7 milliards.
About $2.7 billion worth of goods and services cross our shared border every day. Roughly 3/4 of Canada's exports go to the U.S., and Canada is the #1 customer from more than 30 states. In fact, the U.S. sells more goods to Canada than it sells to China, Japan, and the U.K. combined.
To each other, we make things together, from auto parts and components that cross the border multiple times in the production of a final vehicle, to the animals that are born in one side of the border, raised on the other, and travel back again for slaughter or food processing. And of course, COVID has brought to light another very important example. Canada is a top supplier to the US of critical PPE and PPE inputs, including for masks and gowns and ventilators. And Canada is a main market for US exports of PPE and PPE inputs, including cleaning compounds and soaps, needles and syringes. So simply put, as President Biden said last Tuesday, the US has no better friend than Canada. And there's no country in the world that wants the US to succeed more than Canada does. Our prosperity and also our security are fundamentally linked in an enduring way. The breadth and depth and significance of the relationship was clear when the Prime Minister and the President met last week, virtually. It was the President's first bilateral meeting with a foreign counterpart since taking office. The leaders released a roadmap that outlines dozens of concrete commitments for Canada and US collaboration in the coming years. And of course, for both our countries, the top priority is to end the COVID-19 pandemic. The leaders agreed to strengthen collaboration in that regard, and they agreed to take a coordinated approach based on science and public health when considering when to begin easing border restrictions. They discussed their shared vision for an economic recovery that creates good paying and secure jobs in both countries and ensures that the benefits of economic growth are shared more widely. The pandemic has not affected everyone equally, and that's true on both sides of the border. So they also announced a joint initiative to help small and medium-sized enterprises recover, with a focus on supporting women-owned and minority Indigenous-owned businesses. The President and the Prime Minister spoke of the importance of our deeply interconnected and mutually beneficial economic relationship. The reality is that economic recovery in Canada and in the US will be faster, stronger, and more enduring if we move forward together. That's why the President and the Prime Minister launched a new strategy to strengthen Canada-US supply chains, and that's why they recognize the important benefits of the bilateral energy relationship and its infrastructure. En ce qui concerne les changements climatiques,
on climate change, there are opportunities to work together, but internationally, but also at home, where we can align policies and approaches to create jobs while tackling carbon emissions. To that end, the leaders agreed to create the necessary supply chains to make Canada and the U.S. global leaders in battery development and production.
In the economic elements of the roadmap, but the leaders also made very concrete plans to expand cooperation on continental defense, cybersecurity, cross-border crime, and the Arctic. They discussed ways to align our approaches on China, including how we deal with China's coercive and unfair economic practices, national security challenges, human rights abuses. They discussed the arbitrary detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor and the President committed to work for their release. Canada's relationship with the US is strong, it's interdependent, and it's multifaceted. It's precisely because of this interdependence that decisions on one side of the border are often very impactful on the other. And so while we work together on these many shared goals, Canada must also be vigilant in advancing our priorities and standing up for our interests, clearly and strongly. We learned from our experience in negotiating the new NAFTA that a Team Canada approach is constructive and effective. Working towards the same goals and consistently presenting compelling facts to our US counterparts in the administration and Congress and all levels of government has proven to be successful. So I'd just like to conclude by saying this is a very exciting time in the Canada-US relationship. There are many opportunities for Canada in the years ahead in working with the Biden administration, and I think we're very well placed to seize them. Merci et je serai heureuse de répondre à vos questions.
Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Hillman. We'll go to the first 6-minute round to MP Lewis.
Well, thank you so very much, and thank you for your very awesome words. I was listening very intensely on that front again as well. So thank you for that. You did mention a couple of things that really I kind of keyed in on. So the first one was you had spoke about the government being so concerned with ensuring that small and medium-sized businesses recover. And then you had also spoke about supply chains that work together. And you also spoke to the fact that both Canada and US countries, they are very impactful on each other. I guess my question is, what are we doing to ensure, because I'll be honest with you, so for my riding of Essex, down very near Windsor, the busiest international border, I will suggest that we're really struggling down here. We're struggling dearly. And we're having problems when Canadians leave, when Canadian business owners who have every right in the world, they have their visas to cross, to come back into their country, back into our country, are having problems. And they have to quarantine for 14 days and they can't literally run their businesses. I'm wondering, can you tell me, has there been discussions, bilateral discussions in that if we are indeed going to have the border open, if we're indeed going to take care of both countries, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, has there been discussions as to how we can come up with a solution that people don't have to be afraid to go to the border, to cross the border, I should say, to be quarantined for 14 days? Has there been any discussion at all with that?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So just on the border, maybe I can just start by saying that for a year now, I've had discussions about every 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit more, with the Department of Homeland Security on the Canada-US border. And those discussions are around what are our policy objectives with respect to the border? What restrictions do we feel we need to put in place in order to achieve those policy objectives? And since the outset, the joint objective that we set with the United States was to minimize and in fact stop non-essential travel, but to allow essential business travel to continue. It was a monumental decision, as everybody knows. It was unprecedented. But ultimately, as we looked at the data and as we checked in with each other every couple of weeks, it was clear that that measure was doing what it was designed to do, because truck travel across in your neighborhood, but across the country, was down by maybe 5%, maybe 7%, maybe 2%, maybe not at all, depending on the week. The actual release of goods into Canada and into the United States, again, was down very little, sometimes not at all. But the rest of travelers overall at the land border was down, depending on the week, between 80 and 90%.
Okay,
and
thank you.
It was seen to be very important and has, I think, proven to be very important in controlling the spread in our communities.
So thank you very much for that. So I would go on to my next question would be that, you had mentioned about the Team Canada approach is working. The truth of the matter is, at least in my area, it's not working because we are losing business to the United States and to Mexico hand over fist because our owners who are putting foods on the tables of Canadian families, Estonian families. It's not working because they're being quarantined. And I have spent hours and weeks on the phone with these owners saying, you know what, I'm just going to pick up stock. I'm moving to the States. I'm going to bring the business to the States. I'm out of here. I'm gone because I can't afford to send my employees across to the border anymore. Who specifically, what should we be doing to make sure that we can get to the very cusp of the problem and move that forward? Because if we indeed are going to open up the border, we better do it sooner than later, because just next week, Windsor Essex is losing business, and not small pieces, huge manufacturing, good paying jobs. Any thoughts who I can grab the phone and call?
Well, I mean, I think that those decisions with respect to the Canadian border and the way that we're managing the Canadian border, of course, are happening in Ottawa with our border services and CBSA and public safety and the health officials. I mean, we have said since the beginning that we will make those decisions as a government based on science and the advice of experts. And President Biden, is saying the exact same thing. When we met with him last week, he said, with respect to the opening of the border, those decisions will be made based on the facts on the ground, how the virus is progressing, what the scientists and the experts are saying. And so we're very much aligned in that respect. I think that we're going to see a fairly, a very sense of common purpose with the administration moving forward. Of course, we would like to, get things back to normal as soon as possible, but ultimately that's not going to be possible until we control the virus in both countries.
Mr. Lewis, 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, very much. I appreciate it. I won't ask a question. I will respect the chair's time. I would suggest if there's some way you can get a phone number for President Biden, I would be very willing to talk to him to protect jobs in Canadian families. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Before we go to the next question, Ambassador Hillman, can you move your mic up a bit? Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Lewis, for your intervention. Next 6 minutes goes to Mr. Sarai.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'll be splitting my time with Mr. McKay, Member of Parliament McKay, so I'll go in 3 minutes if you can time me, Chair. Ambassador, I want to thank you for coming, and as we understand, you're here at a very good time. I think relations between the two countries couldn't be better in terms of a lot of the synergies that both the governments share. But at the same time, we have several key issues: Buy America, Line 5, Keystone XL, softwood lumber. These are four big issues that are challenging us right now, and there may be others. For me, the big one I see right now is Line 5, and the ongoing one close to my heart is softwood lumber. As to Line 5, we were told by GAC officials that resolving this dispute with the state of Michigan will be through diplomatic means, which is usually how most of our resolutions come about with the Americas. How has the embassy been involved in this conversation around Line 5 with the governor of Michigan and other levels of state?
Okay, happy to answer that question. First, as I answer your question, I would like to say this. From our perspective here at the embassy, obviously for the government's perspective, this Enbridge's Line 5 is a crucial piece of energy infrastructure for Canada, but also for the United States. So that is a core and principal message that we're giving. We are underlining the fact that a shutdown of the pipeline would have, of course, severe impacts for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, but also Michigan, also Ohio. And we have a pipeline here that has been operating safely since 1953. So that's the context in which we have those discussions. We support full-throatedly and very actively the continued safe operation of that pipeline. And we also, of course, have to underline with our friends from Michigan that we are equally committed to protecting, the Great Lakes. That's an important resource for both of our countries. And we know Enbridge is committed to those goals as well. And I talk with the company very often, and so does my team. And they have been seeking to address the concerns of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, and her predecessor, who also had concerns with the line. Those discussions have broken down. There's a lot of, I know you've heard from a lot of witnesses on this topic over the last week. There's a lot of litigation ongoing in that regard. But ultimately, I think that the solution to this will come about through diplomatic and advocacy means, but it will also come about through negotiations between the company and the governor of the territory through which it's going. So it's going to be a combination of all of us working together to find a solution. And the company has been mandated by the court to seek mediation with the state in order to see if they can work through some of the differences that they have with respect to this project. For our part, sorry, did you want me to stop?
No,
I know
I'm
probably taking up your 3 minutes, so I apologize, but I'd like to get this out on the table,
Absolutely,
and then all the
absolutely.
rest of you can ask me all sorts of follow-up questions. But for our part, the government, we've been advocating for Line 5 continuously nonstop since 2017. This issue of this pipeline has been relevant in Michigan for several years and before this governor. And so we have been very active in the region. Joe Comartin, our Consul General, and his predecessor, very active in the region, making sure that everybody understands the importance of this line for Michiganders and for the United States. We have made several on the record written comments in support of Line 5 and the proposed tunnel project by Enbridge. We participate in a federal provincial working group that sort of coordinates advocacy around the project in Michigan, in adjoining states, at the federal level. And of course, it was raised by in the Prime Minister's discussion with President Biden last week. It was raised by the Minister with his counterpart, Mr. O'Regan. It was raised by the Prime Minister with the U.S. Secretary of State. I've raised it with the Governor Whitmer several times, and her predecessor at least a couple of times. So active, detailed advocacy for several years now.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Time.
Thank you, Mr. Sarai. To go to Mr. McKay for about 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Well, maybe you could wedge me on to some other question at some point or another, but I think I got the short end of that stick. So let me just set the table for the generosity, anticipated generosity of the chair. Secretary Tai was recently confirmed by the Senate committee, and possibly she will be the most important secretary that we have, and one that you will have. Well, I know you know her, but we'll have a lot of relationships with her. And under the heading in the article, "Rethinking the China Strategy," she says some interesting things about that the U.S. needs a strategic and coherent plan for holding China accountable. China is simultaneously a rival and a partner. We can't compete by doing things that China does. We have to figure out how to do things differently, and goes on to make several examples. The most significant of which was, I think that the use of forced labor is probably the crudest example of the race to the bottom. So the question I have for you is that an active conversation between the government of Canada and the government of the United States as to how to align our interests in that sort of discussion?
I apologize, Ambassador Hillman. You have less than 30 seconds.
It's okay. The answer is yes. The answer is the question of forced labor in trade agreements is something that we have in our new NAFTA. It is something that exists in the CPTPP. It was an active discussion in the CPTPP, which is an Asia-centric trade agreement, as you may know, which is one that's near and dear to my heart. So this is a very, very active conversation. I think that USTR Tai will be a very interesting counterpart. She's someone I know very well, and she, I think, has said that she sees trade policy as a means of achieving important economic ends, but also making sure that in achieving those ends, we are promoting, important values internationally. And you've put your finger exactly on one of those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. We will now go to Monsieur Savard Tremblay. Vous avez 6.
You have 6 minutes, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Good evening, Madam Ambassador, and thank you very much for coming here today. I'd like to ask you, if ever the Plan Biden is adhered to strictly, what would be the alternative? Let's say there may be some piecemeal solutions. Is that something that we may look at? What have we been thinking of to date? Thank you very much. When you say the Biden plan on what issue? Protectionism, Buy America Act. We know that the Buy America Act is a strict application of regulations rather than a new law. So if it's enforced strictly, what type of a solution could we envision taking? Thank you. The first thing is to say that this Buy America policy exists at the federal level and at the state level. Some policies at the federal level may have an impact on Canada, others not. Where it may affect us is the Buy American plans. When we talk about Buy American plans, that affects us. We do have WTO exemptions for that type of policy. For the Buy America policy, this is a policy that pertains to money, funds that are sent by the federal government to the states for specific projects, particularly infrastructure projects. And for the time being, this would be iron, steel, and certain products that are manufactured. Iron is fer and acier is steel. I don't speak French very often here in Washington. Well, I'm pleased to give you some practice today. So that's it. So these programs, well, we have to live with them. They're there. So as for the Biden administration, the question is, will they strengthen those policies? Will they going to add other products to the list? And as far as that's concerned, I don't think that it's going to be done on a state-by-state basis. But what is important for Canada, and it's important that we point this out, is that there are a lot of things that we don't know. Everything's going to depend on how they're going to implement these policies. The executive order was promulgated a month ago, but it doesn't really have an impact on us at all. So we have to really study this. The details are going to be what's important. That will tell us how this is going to unfold and whether it will have an impact on us. We have a lot of reasons to believe that we're going to be able to come up with some good arguments to say that this should not apply to Canada. And perhaps we need to deal with the states. Yes, we have to work with everyone. We have to work with the unions. We have to work with the business sector, with members of Congress, with governors, legislators, because the communities are where the jobs are. And the Buy American policy is a policy that, and when I was saying earlier in my comments at the start, it's the supply chain that we have between the Canada and the United States that creates jobs. It creates a lot of jobs. And when that's cut off, jobs are lost. So we have to go to see the people in the community where these jobs may be at risk in order to talk about the implications of policies that are being proposed. You talked about the need to work with the governors. You know that there's an issue right now with the governor of Michigan. do you have a strategy to calm the fears that the governor of Michigan refers to with respect to this infamous Line 5? First of all, it must be said that, and I'm no specialist in the science of this, but from what I've read, I'm confident that this is a safe project. But she has some concerns on that front. And as I said a minute ago, I think the solution exists it has to be between the company and the governor and us as facilitators. I think we have to facilitate these conversations. We have to look at the facts. It's all about relationships. What can we do to advance the discussion? Absolutely. But you said that you're not an expert in the field, but I think the chair is telling me that I am out of time, perhaps? 30 seconds. So somebody must be right. The governor has fears. The company is saying that it's safe. There's got to be some scientific way of proving who's right. Yes, and that's why I said that it is a good idea at the federal level to ask the two parties to find a mediator to try and facilitate these discussions. Thank you. Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Is Mr. Blakey for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ambassador, for the time you're spending with us today. There's been a lot of high-level talk about opportunities to have a united front against climate change and some of the economic opportunities that might present themselves as a result of that. I'm just wondering if you could give a little more detail in terms of what some of those opportunities are and what Canada is planning to actively pursue with the new Biden administration.
Thanks. It's a good question. So one, I would refer you to this roadmap that has been recently agreed to. I would say, this roadmap is incredibly substantive. I've never seen a leader's statement with more concrete projects articulated in it. So, and I say that truly, I've never seen anything quite like it. In that, you will get some very concrete ideas about some of the areas that we see as priorities right away and key opportunities right away. In the United States, the vehicle emissions, transportation emissions are the #1 source of greenhouse gas. And so there is a very strong effort here, and it's a key priority of the Biden administration to work to decarbonize the transportation sector. We all know that, certainly with respect to the automotive sector, we are deeply integrated with the United States. We also know that Canada has access to critical minerals that the US is interested in for the purposes of battery technology that's important for that transportation transformation. We also have some really interesting innovation taking place in a number of provinces around battery technology. So that is very important to them. It's a huge opportunity. It's already a highly integrated sector, and we have a lot of know-how and knowledge to share. And that is very much something that they're interested in. So that would be one.
If I may, just curious to know, so when we talk about Canada having those resources, I think Canada also has an interest in doing the value-added work and not creating a situation where we're simply, mining raw materials and then sending it to the US for the manufacture of batteries. Much better to sell finished batteries into the US. Is there any concern about whether it's Buy America specifically or the posture of Buy America interfering with the ability to develop that value-added work in Canada and sell finished product into the United States?
No, I don't think so. I think actually quite the contrary. So our critical minerals action plan that we work on with the United States, we have been for a couple of years now, is a whole supply chain project. And it is specifically designed so that all elements of the supply chain exist within our country as well. Same thing for battery technology. It is going to be an area where we will incentivize and work towards developing that technology and doing that manufacturing in Canada. I'm sure the US will do it in the United States as well, right? But the goal actually, and this was discussed last Tuesday, the goal was actually to make our two countries the leaders at the forefront, get out ahead of other blocks of countries that might also be looking to be leaders in this technology and in this manufacturing. So no, not at all. There's two other things I would mention. So that the transportation and vehicle sector, the Biden administration is also going to have to, in order to meet some of their targets, and they've said this very clearly, work to make their energy sector and their electrical grid decarbonize it. There we have an awful lot to offer as well in our hydro. We have hydro abilities across the country, right? We have a new project, well, it's not that new anymore, I guess, but between Manitoba and North Dakota, I believe, that came in online last year. And I think you're from Manitoba, so you probably
I am indeed.
Yeah. There you go. So that, and of course in Quebec and in Ontario, these are really, really important projects, and they provide a lot of opportunities for us. And then the U.S. is very interested in carbon capture. They're very interested in technology around ensuring that there isn't, I'm not sure I'm going to get these words right, but leakage and capping oil and gas productions that are no longer being used, so as not to inadvertently, and again, if I get this wrong, I apologize, but to make sure that there isn't leakage coming out in those areas. So that's also something that we have a lot of experience with, and we have some really good innovations in Canada around carbon capture in particular, and other technologies. So I see a lot of opportunities here. Frankly, I think we're ahead of the Americans in a lot of really important ways, and we should leverage that. We should leverage that to make sure that we are able to continue to, be ahead, or at least be partners of choice for them as they move in these directions.
Right on. I see that I don't have very much time remaining.
30 seconds, Mr. Blakey.
I do want to ask, so maybe I'll set the stage, and when I get a couple minutes on the back end of this round, I'll come back to this question. But I am curious to know, we heard from Trade Committee officials last meeting that there's very little chance that Canada would get any kind of blanket exemption to Buy America. So I'm wondering, on the climate change front, and in light of some of the partnerships that we may be undertaking with the United States, and that I hope we do on climate, how we might gain exemptions to the Buy America policy on the basis of a North American climate change strategy, because we do have companies like New Flyer here in Winnipeg that manufacture electric buses, for instance, that can do a lot to help whether states and municipalities in the U.S. lower their carbon footprint, and ensuring that those Canadian products and services can get into the American market may become an important part of their own strategy. So looking for opportunities to ensure that Buy America isn't getting in the way of a continental strategy to combat climate change. So I'm out of time. I recognize that, Mr. Chair, but
you were out of time a long time ago, but I didn't want to ruin your frame of thought. So we'll come back to that. So we're now entering the second round. So for 5 minutes, Mrs. Alice Leff.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Ambassador, for being here. I wanted to discuss just quickly the border criteria to be open. So we are losing jobs. We do need to open the border as quickly as possible. And we don't want to jeopardize health and safety, absolutely. But in order for people to plan, we absolutely need to understand what the American criteria for it to be open will be, and the Canadian criteria. So what are the specifics that need to be met in order to be open?
Right. No, and look, I understand that question, and I understand the need that's driving it. As I said, this is talking about what's happening at the border is a regular feature of my responsibilities here. I think what I have to say to that is we've been in touch already with the White House, with the COVID committee at the White House, and obviously with the Department of Homeland Security. The border was discussed between the leaders, and what's clear is that the Biden administration is going to want to move to that discussion in the same way they're moving through everything that they're doing down here on COVID, which is stepwise, carefully, very planned out, listening to their scientists, listening to their experts.
Do we have an idea of when we might have that information? It's critical. When can we? They're looking to have their population vaccinated by May. We're 6 months after that. Obviously, supply chains will resume when we are able to be open. They will be open potentially before us, and therefore our supply chains may be excluded. When will we know what their criteria are so that we can get there as quickly as possible?
I am afraid I can't say when we're going to know. I can say that we talk about it all the time. But can I just say one thing? Can I just say one thing? Our supply chains, and this was the point I made earlier, our supply chains are working, right? We do have, in terms of commercial releases into Canada and Canadian commercial releases into the United States, we have a very small diminishment from last year. So I'm not trying to deny how hard this is.
That's not what we're hearing on the ground, though, Ambassador. So people are feeling that they're losing business. But regardless, we need the border open, and recovery will be directly proportional to that. And we need to understand what those criteria are as quickly as possible. Likewise, with the vaccines that are being produced in the US that Canada will have access to, timing matters. Do you have any insight into what that timing is?
Well, I can say that there is a contract with AstraZeneca, which is produced here in the United States. And my understanding is that those doses are to start being delivered to Canada in the second quarter. That's the timing I'm aware of.
Thank you very much. And the roadmap was comprehensive, absolutely, but it also shows the areas that we agree on. I wonder if you could give us the top 3 areas that didn't make it into the roadmap that are Canadian priorities that perhaps we want to further but didn't make it into the roadmap.
Well, you know, I'm not sure I would
line 5.
Yeah, but okay. So
Keystone XL, or are we to understand that that's off the table now? Canada has priorities. Not all of our priorities are in the roadmap. What are the priorities of Canada that are not there?
I think that I would say to that if Canada is very focused on making sure that there are aspects of our relationship that are understood, and there are aspects of what's been going on in Canada over the last 4 years since this president and some of his colleagues have been gone. There are things that we have done that they are not aware of and that they are not fully apprised of.
Thank you, Ambassador. Could you give me some of the U.S. priorities that didn't make it into the roadmap so that we're aware of what they would like that perhaps might be more controversial?
Ambassador, 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, there wasn't sort of a disagreement on we would like this in, we wouldn't like this in. I have to be very frank with you. There really wasn't. There was a discussion around how we formulate certain things in relation to some of the work that we're doing internationally, how we wanted to articulate that, how explicitly we wanted to articulate that, whether we wanted to be more vague about it. We talked about things like that. We talked about whether there was enough, whether there was enough in there on international cooperation around COVID, whether there was too much, whether we should be focusing more on what we want to do together. There were those kinds of things, but the big buckets of things that we were working on, they were fairly well understood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ellslev. For the next 5 minutes, Mr. McKay.
If I appear to be surprised, it's only because I am. So
I did not anticipate this 5 minutes, but I thank you for that, Mr. Chair, and I'll certainly start to think very highly of you because of this gratuitous 5 minutes. So the interesting issue is with the United States and this continuing China's strategy and the changes that may well ensue as a result. And what I'm concerned about is not only the issue of supply chain slavery, but also the other issues where we are going to have to realign our trade policy with the Americans. And if you could give us some idea of what you think will be the short-term realignments. And the second issue is a commentary on the United States position on the CPTPP. The senator that was questioning Secretary Tai described rejoining that as what I understood to be a fool's errand. And I wasn't quite clear what that meant. So if you could help the committee out with respect to both of those issues, where we are going to have to realign and in terms of our trade priorities, but second of all, what is our relationship going forward with the Americans and that trading agreement?
Okay. So first, I would say that one of the things that we have learned, Canada's learned, the U.S. has learned, I think many of our allies and partners have learned through this COVID crisis, is that we need a certain amount of additional self-reliance when it comes to critical supply chains, whether those are health supply chains, PPEs and such, whether those are food supply chains, whether those are energy supply chains, whether those are national security supply chains. There's a certain degree to which, and that's where critical minerals comes in, because there's also important military applications in some of those products. So there is a need for us to be sure that we have the systems in place to be able to rely on those supply chains when the going gets tough. And in some level that means doing more ourselves, and in some level that means doing more with allies who we know are going to have our backs when the chips are down. And in my view, and in my experience over this past year, even though the previous administration was very challenging for us in a number of ways that we all know, when it came down to really working through some urgent needs around, for example, PPEs at the beginning of the crisis, those supply chains, the existence of them and the interdependence of them became really, really obvious. And it was demonstrated to us and to our American friends that we had each other's backs, if you will, to continue my phrase, when the chips were down. So that is going to be an important policy consideration for our government and the American government going forward. Also the Europeans, our NATO allies and others. It's going to be important as we try to reflect on the lessons learned from this past year that we have gone through and what's coming next. In terms of aligning our trade policy with the United States, I think I would flip that on its head. I think I would say that we see with the Biden administration, an administration is now willing to align its trade policy with ours. We had the previous administration was an administration that did not respect international treaties that we had entered into, did not respect international dispute settlement, that used tools that were not designed at all for trade disputes, sort of regular trade disputes, in order to bring trade consequences to its closest partners. So I think they were misaligned. I actually think that the Biden administration is very much aligned with the way that we see rules-based, organized, open international trade operating.
The other.
Oh, I didn't answer your TPP.
You want your TPP? The TPP question, but I also have another one if I can squeeze it in on the generosity of the chair.
Sure. So on the CPTPP, my understanding of this, and we'll know more as USTR tie gets into place and we have more conversations with her. But my understanding is that right now the US priority is not to negotiate international trade agreements really at all. They're really focusing on, as all of us are, kind of looking at our own communities and our own people and making sure that we're doing things that are addressing the most immediate needs first. So that's how I take that comment.
And there was a part of the readout between the Prime Minister and the President had to do with the renegotiations of the NORAD treaty and the defense and security.
Mr. McKay, you have 10 seconds left. Sorry.
Well, that's a simple question to answer in 10 seconds. So I'll possibly get another chance. But thank you, Ambassador. Thank you,
Monsieur Savard Tremblay.
Mr. Savard Tremblay, you have 2.5 minutes. Hello again, Madam Ambassador. You explained the difference between Buy America and Buy American. I'd like to know about your discussions in the United States with the government of the U.S. Are we anticipating that Canada will respond by coming forth with its own legislation about Buy Canadian that might give priority to Canadian businesses? And is that a fear? Do you hear this issue raised? I would say that, first of all, we always begin by focusing on the fact that Buy American policies are often designed because they think, or the idea behind it is that creates jobs for Americans. It's a job creation policy. As for business between Canada and the U.S. and the supply chains, if you cut the supply chain, they wind up doing the opposite. So that is where we are focusing. But it's clear that our government will also be investing in our economy soon, and our government has spent money to buy goods to focus on infrastructure for Canada at both the federal and provincial levels. So I think it's a very important question that needs to be put to our American counterparts. Will they continue to be open and supported of each other, or are they going to be taking another path where they'll be shutting down a relationship that has been very effective, where everybody invests in products that are created by our own citizens, our own companies rather. So you don't think that you have 30 seconds.
In English. I think it's important to focus on the positive, to say keeping supply chains open, keeping these very, very mutually beneficial relationships going creates jobs. Cutting them absolutely leads to the loss of jobs. And in fact, the questions by some of the honorable members around the border underline that very point. It happens in Canada, and it absolutely happens in the United States. But in addition, I think what we can say is that at the federal level, and no doubt at the provincial level, there will be stimulus spending over the next number of months. And in that stimulus spending, governments will be buying things. And I think it's a very legitimate question to pose to our American friends. Do we really want to be going down a path where we don't have our procurements open to each other? That doesn't seem like a very good idea, because Americans benefit an awful lot from Canadian government procurement as well.
Merci, Monsieur Savard Tremblay. Mr. Blakey, you have 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to use these minutes, if I could, just to come back to the question that I posed before about the potential for a united front around climate change to create some leverage, if you will, on the Buy America front in order to maybe relax some of the worst of those provisions when it comes at least to Canadian products and services that would help municipalities, states, and the federal government in the United States reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, I'm going to answer your question by being a bit more general, because I think the answer to your question isn't specific to environmental supply chains. I think it's an answer that applies to all of the Canada-U.S. trade. Buy American policies are put in place because there's a perception that doing so creates jobs in the local economy. When it comes to Canada-U.S. trade, that is not true. It does the opposite. It actually makes us lose jobs. This fact is understood by many in the United States. It is clear. It was sort of reinforced through all of the legwork that we did during the NAFTA negotiations. And just last week, our leaders spoke about the fact that our deeply integrated, mutually supportive economic relationship is going to be vital to our economic recovery. And they launched this strategy to strengthen Canada-U.S. supply chains. So the point is, we have said, we will continue to say, it is impossible to be heading down this supply chain integration, mutually reinforcing, let's help each other out of this recession, let's get out of it faster together, and at the same time impose domestic content requirements.
And I do hear that kind of general argument, but we heard from Steve Verheul, who's somebody I believe you know quite well, at committee just Tuesday, that a very serious skepticism about Canada getting any kind of general exemption or any kind of large-scale scaling back from Buy America policy. So I'm just wondering if we have a strategy that's a little more targeted for certain kinds of goods and services in order to ensure that that we're getting as much access as possible to the American market.
So again, I would get back to sort of what Buy America is versus Buy American, and the only policies that apply to Canada are Buy America. And at this point, they apply to steel, iron, and some manufactured goods, right? And we are living with those. If there is an effort to ratchet those up, we will absolutely seek an exemption from everything that applies to Canada and affects Canadian supply chains.
I think what we've heard is that there's a bill now for a considerable amount of infrastructure investment.
Mr. Blakey, I'm really sorry, Mr. Blakey, we're out of time. Can we go to Mr. Strahl for 5 minutes, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your presentation today. I want to talk about China specifically. Did the issue of the Uyghur genocide and Canada's failure to declare it such come up at the bilateral meetings? I know there was a section on China. It did not mention the Uyghur genocide. It talks about human rights violations. Clearly, the new Secretary of State, the past Secretary of State, have both declared that what is happening in China with the Uyghurs is a genocide. So I'm wondering if that was discussed and if the Biden administration pressured the Canadian side to join with them and join with, quite frankly, the House of Commons and declare that what is happening to the Uyghurs in China is a genocide.
So the situation in China with respect to human rights abuses generally, Uyghurs in particular, was discussed in the series of meetings last week. And we shared perspectives on that, and the U.S. administration didn't, really raise Canada's position at all.
Did the U.S. administration raise the issue of Canada's failure to exclude the Huawei network, Huawei company from Canadian 5G networks as they have done?
No.
Okay. With respect to the Biden administration's shift or attempted trying to rebuild some alliances to counter China's influence in the U.S., the countries that are always mentioned are Australia, Japan, etc. Is Canada a part of that, or is our government's approach to China on things like Huawei, on our much closer alignment with China that that the government has, does that impede our ability to be part of that new alliance that the Biden administration is proposing to counter China's influence around the world?
So I guess what I would say to that is that Canada's concerns around whether it's, the economic pressures of China, human rights violations, security concerns are something that we discuss with the Biden administration and we discussed with the previous administration on a regular basis between me and my team, every week, no doubt. We discuss it bilaterally, discuss it with our Five Eyes colleagues, we discuss it in NATO contexts. I don't think, I know that there is no perception in any way, shape, or form by any American counterpart, present or past, that Canada is any way soft on China. We are living through an incredibly challenging time with China. Our bilateral relationship, I would say, is at a very low point after the arrest and arbitrary detention of the Michaels, and the effects of certain economic consequences for our canola industries and others. So I don't think that there's any suggestion at all that Canada is anything but strong and aligned with all of our like-minded colleagues around the world with respect to the issues around our values, whether they're economic, human rights, or otherwise.
I don't know how much time I have, Mr. Chair.
Less than a minute and a half.
Okay. Have you been given, back to kind of the energy focus of today's meeting, have you been given a mandate by the government of Canada to promote and market Canadian energy? Specifically, the minister talked about, how environmentally, how well we do at producing it, but obviously that message did not make it through to the Biden administration. Keystone XL. So have you been given a mandate by the government to kind of double down on that and promote our world-leading oil and gas sectors?
Yes. So just to be super clear, since I've been here in DC, which is I guess 3.5 years now, advocating for Canadian energy infrastructure, our oil and gas sector has been a major focus of this embassy. We have an entire section that deals with energy and individuals who deal with oil and gas sector in particular. In anticipation, in 2019, and in anticipation of the federal election, we worked for well over a year with Alberta and the sector, long before President Biden was even a candidate, to get all of the information out there about what's happening in our sector, about the innovations that have been made, about the regulations that are in place, about the benefits of the Canada-US energy relationship and the oil and gas relationship in particular. I mean, I believe that we made an incredibly strong case. We spoke to hundreds of people around this over the course of 1.5 years, including the top decision makers. I mean, it's very challenging. Energy infrastructure is very challenging, and that particular, that particular project was also very difficult. I'm from Alberta. I grew up in Alberta. I have a lot of family in Alberta. I have family that works in the energy sector in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I know how hard that decision was. I know how hard it is for Canadians. But we are working on this nonstop every day here and across the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. And I'll go to the final question to Mr. Housefather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll be sharing my time with Ms. Bindayan. Ambassador Hillman, it's great to see you. Having been to law school with you, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a couple of legal questions. Basically, the first report from this committee is about Line 5. And I understand that this is a private dispute between Enbridge and the state of Michigan, that we're looking for a diplomatic resolution in every direction. Totally understand that. But I'd like to just ask, is it the opinion of the government of Canada that the PHMSA, the federal government's Department of Transport, has the authority to overrule the state of Michigan's decision to end the easement? That's number one. Number two, is it our opinion that the legislature of the state of Michigan has the ability to overrule the decision of the executive of the state of Michigan if the Senate and the reps of Michigan vote that way? And number three, if none of that happens, does the government of Canada believe that either through bilateral agreements with the United States or international treaties that we're parties to, that we have the ability as Canada to be a party to stop Michigan from ending the easement? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. And I know you've been asking all of the witnesses these legal questions, and I fear I may give you an equal amount of dissatisfaction in my answers. These are all important questions, so I'm not denying that. your first question, I have no real comment on that. With respect to the revocation of the easement, my understanding is it wasn't an executive order. It was done according to the terms of the easement itself. I don't know if that particular act, we don't know, and there are discussions and analysis, I would assume, being undertaken, whether that is subject to some sort of intervention by the state legislature. I'm sure they are looking into that question themselves, because the state legislature in Michigan is supportive, by and large, of Line 5, as I'm sure all of you know. So those are important questions in this what's becoming quite a complex and tangled set of litigations. And our consulate in Detroit is in touch with the legislature to discuss this issue with members of the legislature regularly, as well as with the governor's office and her people. So, he'll probably be the person who would come to understand what the legislature's position is more quickly than anyone. So we'll watch that. And that obviously that's an issue that is sort of internal to that state and their political apparatus. With respect to the government of Canada and what we may or may not do from a legal perspective in, as I say, these different legal cases that are underway, we're assessing that. That's the honest answer. We're looking at that. We're assessing it. We will close no door. And we will make the decision that we think is going to have the best chances of ensuring that this issue is solved and that we are assured that Line 5 will continue.
Thanks, Kirsten. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, colleague, and thank you, Ambassador, for being with us tonight. I just wanted to take the opportunity to clarify a couple of things on the record as Canadians are listening to us. Of course, as you mentioned earlier, Buy American, Canada does have an exemption from that under WTO treaties, and Buy America, which has been the subject of some discussion tonight and will be the subject of our next debate, is an issue. And I would like to just clarify, because my colleague, I think, raised an infrastructure bill, which doesn't exist yet. So I would just like to point out that there is discussion of an infrastructure bill in the United States, but there is nothing yet on the table. And secondly, just to also mention, from where I sit as parliamentary secretary to the Minister of International Trade, working with Minister Ng, we have certainly not taken our foot off of the gas. We continue to press our counterparts on this issue, and I imagine it's the same for you. Ambassador, can you please let us know, is your foot still very much on the gas on this issue?
So on the gas, on the issue of Buy American?
Buy America.
Buy America, okay, good. Just to say, there's a lot of gas pedals. So absolutely 100%. And again, I not to be a broken record about this, but we are in a general way, and have been for many months, reaching out to here in Washington, obviously colleagues in Ottawa who are reaching out to the new administration, to Congress, to business community, to labor leaders, all of whom are supportive of our view that in an economic recovery, we need, and especially the one that we've just experienced with supply chain challenges, we need to be doubling down on our integration and our mutual support for each other. And we have allies, across all sorts of different constituencies here in the United States, and we are working those phones all the time. So that is one thing. And it has been raised in every ministerial contact that has taken place so far, even in portfolios where there is maybe less obvious inclination. It is a core priority for Canada, and therefore it is raised. I think that the work, will continue, because the infrastructure bill, as you rightly point out, isn't in place yet. But we have had incredibly candid conversations right up to the very top about this particular policy and what it potentially could mean and the challenges that it could pose for both of our countries, not just for us, but for them as well. And I think that I think that those voices are being heard. And I would like to just point one thing out: the rapidity or the speed with this administration reached out to us to start talking to us was incredible, right? I had the honor of attending the inauguration. And for those of you who have been here, you'll know that the embassy is just down the street from the Capitol. And I hope the rest of you will be able to come once this is behind us. Before I was even back in my office, there were senior members of the White House who were phoning, who wanted to make contact and talk about what Canada's core priorities. And in that discussion, our energy relationship, energy infrastructure, Buy American, softwood lumber, all of those issues were raised on day one of this administration.
Thank you, Ms. Bendayan, and that ends our round of questions. I hope, Ambassador, you will indulge me in one short question. I know it's been a long day. You know, it's a practical question and it's a philosophical question. My colleague, Mr. Housefather, raised the practicality of the issue of the debate that's happening within Michigan in terms of who actually regulates the pipeline. Is it the Department of Natural Resources, or is it the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administrator? That's one aspect we can't really comment on. The other aspect is the federal engagement, whether at the executive level or at the ministerial level. We also know that we have very close business links, so I'm sure there's a lot of business ties. And the reason I say this, I was a student in the United States for 3 years in Boston, and so I also appreciate the people-to-people ties. And when we were negotiating NAFTA, when we took that whole government approach, we included civil society, business, culture, and obviously the diplomatic and government staff. What are we doing to encourage the closeness, especially with the new administration, especially with the fact that a lot of us have friends and relatives in the United States? Is there a place for civil society going forward?
Well, I think there always is. I mean, you know, something that's pretty obvious to me since I've been here is that the Canada-U.S. relationship is broad, right? There's literally millions of interactions between Canadians and Americans every day, from business to families to academics to, you know, in other times tourists. You know, and the ability of someone like me to do my job, or people like you to do your job as it relates to Canada-U.S. affairs, rests on the shoulders of those millions of interactions, because it's those interactions that create sort of the fiber, right? And create the understanding of our two countries and the importance of one to the other. Something that I think has been very interesting to me over the last couple of weeks, several weeks since this administration has come in. And I think you can see it if you look at that roadmap. It's that in our discussions with the Americans, we operate far less like we would operate with any other country. In other words, it's not fundamentally a discussion of foreign relations when we're talking to each other, because the things that really matter to us in our relationship with the Americans are much more domestic issues. They're issues like, as we've been talking about today, energy infrastructure, like supply chains, like borders, like people wanting to move back and forth, like aligning our climate policies and regulations, like aligning our transportation regulations, like making sure that when we're making large infrastructure spends, we're sharing them with each other. These are much more focused. And I haven't even got into law enforcement, and that's a whole nother area, right? Where we work together every single day, our law enforcement agencies. So our relationship is more. I think it was Condoleezza Rice, if I'm not mistaken, who said that Canada, the U.S., we talk about condo issues. It's like we share a condo together, and the things that we work on together have to do with the fact that we live in the same space. And most of the time, that's great, and sometimes it's not. When they don't shovel their walk, or when they don't fix a leaky roof, or we don't, or vice versa, right? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's more challenging. But it's a relationship of a very different nature than most relationships with foreign governments, and it's because of all of the people-to-people ties.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hillman. I know that I share the sentiment of millions of Canadians of wishing you the best luck as you navigate the new administration, and I know that you will perform as well as you have always performed. And on behalf of the committee, I want to thank you for taking this time in sharing your thoughts with us. And we are deeply appreciative for the insights that you brought, the sort of insights that we don't normally get in the press, but insights that, of your negotiation and the little stories and anecdotes that really show us how close we are allied as two nations, but going forward, how much more alignment is possible in these shared challenges that we face. So on behalf of all my colleagues, thank you very much, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me. And thank you for sharing your, what's important to you and your constituents with me, because it's obviously essential for me to, and my whole team, to make sure that we are, very up to date with what you're thinking about and what you're working on. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you. And one more reminder to my colleagues, the witness list is due tomorrow at 4 p.m. Just so you know, and if you could prioritize that and send that to the clerk, that would be great. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Bye.